all these great conversations here, but I have been tasked with calling this meeting to order. Thank you for all for being here. Today, we will be looking at finishing up the development of the implementation plan. And we should have had in our inboxes, not just chapters 7, 8, 9, but those are our new additions to what we had in hand before, correct?
And chapter 1.
In chapter 1. So do I have a motion to approve these meeting objectives?
So move.
And all in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Did I do second? Sorry, I didn't do a second. My bad.
Who wants to be second? Mark.
Thank you. All right, well, I did the agenda and that's the agenda and the objectives. My bad. Sorry.
Somebody's truck is off.
It should be. Yeah.
Eddie, I think that's shot.
Oh.
I don't know if I found it. No, not yet. That's all.
All right, back on it. And we would have gotten the minutes from our December 11th meeting. If there aren't any corrections there, a motion to approve those minutes.
So move.
Second. All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion passed, and as usual, I turn it over. If there's anything newsworthy, housekeeping or otherwise, we need to touch.
Yeah, did you,
Yeah, of course, Scott stepped
Yeah,
out in the
Scott, so
opportune moment.
falls on you. You want to just give a quick
Yeah,
update?
and he's so more eloquent at summarizing and discussing this than I am. But I did go down and attend this Water SC. I don't know if any of you all had the opportunity to join us online and listen in. I saw Daniel there last night. I said, I'll see you tomorrow because I can't take off like 2 days in a row for this. So I really appreciated his attendance there and his listening in. And they had an open house from 4 to 6 as a meet and greet to walk through for anybody interested. Talks about so they had different tabletops to talk about the process, to talk about the state water planning, RBCs, et cetera. And then had the listening session from 6 to 7. It was basically an open forum for folks to step up and talk about their concerns, their needs, their challenges, their ideas and thoughts. We had, I think only one water supply stepped up and expressed, that was Ken Tuck, he's the chair of the Broad. We had great participation. Tanya called in and discussed her major focus was her concerns about Georgia and some of the pressures coming over there. And agriculture had a really good voice, and I was really proud of those that showed up from the agricultural world. It's not their necessary comfort space. It was spectacularly about expressing their needs, where they come from, their history and such. And Scott's made his way back in, so I'll let him. Sorry.
I'm not certain. I don't know where I stepped in.
I was just summarizing the Water SC, how it was rolled out, the participation that was had, and the fact that it wasn't a space where they received information. It was a space where we heard information from stakeholders, mostly ag, conservation, and one water supply.
Yeah, I think the only observation I have is it's very, those sectors have been uniformly engaged at the Basin councils, I think, is the first statement. There's still, to me, a notable absence of a sector or two, both at the listening sessions and what I see is most of the RBCs. We're really reliant on the industry and development.
Sometimes local government. Too. Local government's always a little bit like.
They're a little like.
Yeah, I think of all the presentations I heard, Tanya was the most comprehensive and best well spoken of all of them. She really did a good job.
And I took some notes, actually, when I got back, I put it all down in thoughts based on sector and what I heard from those. And I noted where the absences were and where they might fall a little bit more under as well. That economic development, I kind of threw manufacturing, although they were present under where the needs, the desires and the wants kind of fell hand in hand. Recreation was something we didn't hear a lot from, but same deal is those that spoke for conservation, although their perspectives are different, their requests are very similar. So I kind of took those sectors that might be underrepresented and tried to see where they fit for those that already had a voice.
The head count in the room, ballpark.
40.
Yeah, I was gonna
I'm
say.
thinking a little bit about that.
I could roughly, I was guesstimating the camera, you couldn't really tell. I was giving a generous estimate of 50. If you took out the paid more,
We said 50, I think they also said that they had 20 online,
32 at the peak.
32 people.
It was riveting. But yeah, okay, so yeah, we had, online, you had as much participation as you did, almost as that, especially if you factor out, take out the pay more. Probably I rough guess looking at it, what I could tell from you, about 20, 25 minutes. Just a my observation.
It was nice to see there was a lot of representation from the RBCs. I think y'all had at least 3 there. Daniel, there might have been, well, you were online.
With Margo.
You were online, yeah. There was at least 5 Saluda RBC members in the room. Maybe one online. There was 3 from the Broad. There was at least 1 from the PD. Brad O'Neill from the Lower Savannah was there. Jacob Oswald, who's there from Lower Savannah. So good. Jason Thompson from Edisto, Hank Stallworth from Edisto, and Jason's also in the Santee. So all the RBCs are represented. And there were comments from Catherine Amadon of the Saluda, she's the vice chair. And I think Ken Tuck said the same thing about encouraging Water SC to work with the RBCs as they develop the state water plan. And not forget that you guys have done 2 years worth of work each. So that was nice to hear. Okay, is Hope online?
No, but Melissa is.
Oh, Melissa. Melissa, if you can hear me, do you want to just mention the tabletop exercise that's going to be on March 5th?
Sure. So we're going to be doing a tabletop exercise March the 5th. This is going to be at the SEEMD, or the Emergency Operations Center here in West Columbia. It is going to be a 1-day workshop where we are actually going to go through the process with the DRC for a simulation of a extreme drought that would trigger the state EOP. If you have been to one of these before, we did one in 2017. We did another one in 2019, right before the fall flash drought. Unfortunately, our every 2-year got thrown off by COVID. And there's going to be more information on this particular tabletop exercise. However, if you're interested in the past tabletop exercises, how they've been run, the outcomes from the 2017 and the 2019 with the full reports, that all information is all available on scdrought.com. I can put that link in the chat here on the Zoom. Hope and I are working right now to pull together the scenarios for how we're going to ramp up drought here in the state. And it will give a chance for people to see the process and participate. And I know Scott has participated in, I believe, both of the ones that we had in 2017. I know he was there in 2019. So I don't know if Scott wants to provide any insight or information about attending the tabletop exercises.
I was there in 2019 and I thought it was a spectacular opportunity. There was a lot of inputs, a lot of utility involvement, a lot of involvement from other sectors as well. Thank you, Melissa, as I was sitting here, I was texting my emergency coordinator the date to make sure they have it, but Melissa will get with you and make sure that the water and wastewater utility sector gets announcements of that opportunity.
We are working on a save the date flyer that should hopefully go out within the next week or so. We are working to get the registration link It will be required registration. NIDIS, the National Integrated Drought Information Systems, is going to be part of that, and they are sponsoring, I believe, lunch. We're trying to get the final approval for all of that. So we are going to need a RSVP head count so we can make sure we have enough food for everyone. But if anybody has any questions about the tabletop exercise or would like a copy of the save the date once it becomes available, you could email myself or Hope. Again, I'll put those email addresses in the chat as well if you guys have any questions.
Hope was telling me that, hopefully the DRC members are all going to be there, and y'all have 4 DRC members on your council, like 3 in the west and 1 in the central. Mark, Scott, I remember the other 2. No, Cheryl, maybe.
Yeah, Cheryl.
Cheryl. And who? 1 in the central. Well,
Me, it's Alan.
Alan, yeah, that's right. Thanks, Alan. But Hope was saying if anybody's other RBC members want to attend, she can likely accommodate, at least 1 additional from each RBC, in addition to the DRC members that are on RBC. So if y'all want to attend, or if there's one other person that's not already on the DRC that wants to attend, let Hope or Melissa know.
And I believe we're going to the past tabletop exercises. We have capped about 100 people, making sure that we give, of course, DRC, the DRC members, most of those seats. We are trying to work with EMD just to see like how many people we can actually put in the operations center with capacity for us to be able to move around, because we will, as part of this tabletop exercise, be doing breakout groups for the DMAs to kind of work through the process along with the, have some of the RBC members in those DMAs as part of that breakout process too. So we need to make sure that we can facilitate those side conversations for all 4 DMAs with enough space to move around. So I know registration will be kind of limited also based on the amount of funding we're able to get to provide everybody. Everybody likes a free lunch, so we want to make sure we give everybody a free lunch.
All right, thank you, Melissa. Appreciate it.
You're welcome.
All right, public comment. No really public members in the room. Any online or agency members want to make comment? Nope. All right. Moving on. November, quick review. We wrapped up our discussion of few remaining policy, legislative, regulatory recommendations. Those are 3 that we kind of honed in and settled on. We'll talk about those later when we look at draft chapter 9. And then we focused on the implementation plan, which is where we want to pick it up today. This may be a shorter meeting. We only have the remaining 20 or so % of our implementation plan to talk about. And then we'll look at process metrics. I haven't mentioned those before. We'll go through setting those process metrics. We'll talk about a few items. We've already gotten some comments on the draft chapters. Mark is always very good about reviewing them. Monday morning in my inbox, I already had comments, so he gets the gold medal. Harry was not far behind. Harry submitted comments as well. I gave you all up till next Friday to submit comments on those 4 draft chapters we sent out, and they're all pretty short. They're not like chapters 5 and 6 or 4. There's not, they're not technical. Especially 7, 8, and 9 are the ones we really want to make sure we've got the wording right, and y'all are comfortable with the narrative behind the recommendations, that we captured the tone and theme of the discussion that we had around the recommendations. And again, y'all agree with the implementation plan, which we're going to finish today. So if you need more time on those draft chapters, let me know, but hopefully 2 weeks is going to be enough. You think 2 weeks will be enough? Anybody need more time? Everybody especially busy over the next 2 weeks that you're not going to be able to get to it? No, okay. All right, let's talk then about finishing the implementation plan. We're going to come back once we finish talking about the final 2 objectives in the implementation plan, and we're going to try to prioritize at the objective level. But for, whoops, wrong application. Let me pull up where we left off. We had talked about objective 5, improved drought management. And I think we pretty much worked through it, but I wanted to just review it in light of the fact that I sent out the draft of chapter. Okay, now make this fast. Since I sent out a draft of chapter 8, which is the drought management response, drought management recommendations, I just want to review the implementation plan part of that deal with drought. The first strategy was the RBC recommends that water utilities review and update their drought plans and response ordinance at least every 5 years. We had some actions in there about at least the public suppliers on the RBC review and update their drought plans. Greenville just did that, so they've done that. I think there's a few others that haven't done it in a while, but that was one of the actions. Second action was to consider ways to incorporate the recommendations into their drought plans. One of those recommendations was, pushing for a drought surcharge. So that's an example of at least RBC utilities to try to implement that in their drought plans. And then making sure you give those updated drought plans to the state climate office. So that was the first strategy and the actions. Everybody good with those? No comments? Okay, I'm going to move on. We had a strategy about doing some outreach and education to implement the strategies that you've got in the plan in chapter 8. And those are listed here. Updating the drought plans, coordinating drought response messaging, consider drought surcharges, and then doing the drought impact observations. What you're going to do to implement that is just perhaps put some materials together, talk about the benefits of those drought recommendations. And as part of your education and outreach plan that you're going to put together, you'll talk about how do we want to get the message out with regard to drought. Everybody good with that? Okay. And then we added one based on discussion about completion of the phase 2 of the Army Corps Comprehensive Study and Drought Plan Update. That one is primarily just encouraging the state, lobbying the state, whatever you want to call it, to provide their cost share of funding so that study can be restarted. Harry, this was your recommendation, and I know Tanya supported it. Is there anything else that you think is important to do as an action to try to make that strategy happen?
Yeah, because otherwise we're stuck with a plan that's 12 years old, the 2012 plan. And it has a lot of benefits to maintain water in the lake longer than the current plan, which helps everybody.
Yeah.
And the other thing is, if there was a third part of the study, which was then to go in and look at some of the operational things. That may be in the future, but I think it's important to nail down this drought plan.
Yeah.
There was a lot of really good work done and shame to see it.
I can't remember if I asked this last time, though. Do you know how much money is needed to finish the study? Did the Army Corps have any estimates?
I'd have to go back and look. I don't, in the grand scheme of things, I don't think it's a lot. I mean, the previous one, South Carolina share was $250,000. And it was matched by the federal and Georgia. So it's not a huge amount of money, probably in the maybe $1 million at the moment. If that
Total.
Which is, I mean, it's a significant sum, but not when you're dealing with states.
Yeah.
Because a lot of the work has been done. I mean, the modeling and everything has been done. It's a question of updating and rezoning. A lot of data has been collected.
My take after having been through the allocation process, any modeling like that was done prior to locating the back, we've had a study, so
Scott,
and so
speak up a little louder.
Yeah, any of the modeling work that was done prior to them evaluating sedimentation studies that they have now. I would consider it valid because they're gonna remodel, they'll remodel it.
Oh, yeah, you definitely have to do some updating. I think
There's also a few other changes that we kind of probably pushed on, that talks about how they handling return flow grading. A lot of their previous modeling would not be, they will not accept the previous modeling.
Is this mostly state money, you think, or ACI always claims poverty? ACE, they do things that I've contacted. Is it mostly state money that's been supported?
In the past, it was, I think, 50% federal, and the other 50% had to come from the states, 25% from Georgia, 25% South Carolina. I don't know if that's the case going forward. I do know that the most recent water bill, which is the federal law governing water resources, allowed the Corps to basically not have to have a federal match, but allow local interests to fund the project. So, because right now, if you happen to have $1 million, they'll be glad to let you fund it. Well, I think they're now in a position where they can accept non-federal participation in developed projects.
Well, Nature Conservancy also picked up a lot of work in that study. In fact, they picked up part of South Carolina.
So Perry, are there any other actions you can think of other than lobbying the legislature to try to find money to encourage the Army Corps to pick this up again?
Not too many. I think the other thing it does, it also forces South Carolina and Georgia to work together too, which is one of our other goals. And
Yeah.
no, I think it always comes down to money.
Mhm. You want an action to work with Georgia to try to collaboratively come up with the money and then say, hey, Army Corps, we've got our 50% share. Can we talk about this?
Well, never hurts to talk, but I'm always suspicious of Georgia.
Okay. Okay. Well, those are the strategies and actions under improved drought management. We're going to move on unless there's any other thoughts about action specific to drought management that you want to add to your plan. Okay, the last objective is promote engagement in the water planning process. We had several recommendations that fall under this objective. One of them was for DES and the RBCs and the planning teams to develop a strategy for maintaining a diverse and representative membership and sustaining the RBCs. Scott mentioned earlier that, the water SC meeting last night, it's kind of obvious we're still a little underrepresented from the industry and manufacturing. Local governments has always been one of the groups that's, got John here, but one of the RBCs only have one member or had a member that dropped off. So that's another category. So for that strategy, we've got a couple actions, DES, RBC planning teams, the RBCs to review membership at least every 6 months, to make sure there is a good diverse mix. If there's any holes identified, then DES and others can try to fill those holes. Second action is for the RBCs and DES to invite elected officials of local governments to join the RBC. That's to try to fill that local government gap. I think that would especially be useful because a lot of the recommendations that you all and Saluda and others have come up with are geared toward local government improving ordinances around land use, trying to prevent sedimentation, improve water quality, having more local government representatives on the RBCs probably help. The last action there is for DES and the RBCs to conduct outreach, promote membership for underrepresented groups as necessary. So kind of just rehashing the first 3 actions. Any comments or thoughts about those actions?
John, I know we talked about it before, but it comes to mind in this discussion. I know our councils of governments are
do training in support of zoning, comprehensive planning, land use planning for the counties and the municipalities they support. That might be a good inclusion.
To get a council government person on the
Yeah.
RBCs.
Yeah.
Yeah,
They have specific people that are support for those organizations. For those topics.
Yeah, because they're all like the facilitators, anytime we do it, we do
I'll just add officials of local government and COGS. Yep, to join, yep. That's a good idea. I think Scott mentioned to me last night, he was trying to get COG member on the Santee RBC. Is that accurate?
That's right.
Yeah. Okay. All right, second strategy was future water planning efforts to consider increased collaboration between all of South Carolina's river basin councils. The actions there were DS to gauge interest in a joint RBC meeting from all active RBCs. This was a similar recommendation and actions I think that the Broad or others have had as well, maybe the PD too, I don't remember. Tom, do you know if the PD had any similar recommendation on have a joint RBC meeting statewide once a year, anything like that?
I think theirs was more focused on the North Carolina side and like creating
Interstate.
another could follow
Yeah.
water reach,
Okay,
Santee reaches.
Yeah.
Or PD.
so all three actions are centered around gauging interest, and if there is interest, doing an annual meeting, putting that on and executing it in subsequent years. I guess that's still kind of to be determined depending on what funding is available to continue to support the RBCs after this first year.
How this recommendation interface with the new water SC?
Question. I don't know if anybody has an answer for that.
Just wondering if we should consider modifying that in any way to support what the water SC recommendations are. Or if that would be a duplicative effort, given RBC members' participation in water SC.
So you're speaking to whatever recommendations that come out of the state water plan, making or.
Well, I guess the bigger question is, what would the purpose of that meeting be? Given that water SC is a separate entity? Would the idea behind this recommendation just be inter RBC collaboration, or is the goal to support water SC? Whatever recommendations come out of that, like, I guess I just want to know what the point of that is, given that water SC exists now.
Right.
I think just to respond right over this. I would still suggest that having the basins meet and identify areas for cooperation would be beneficial to those agencies or to those particular basins. It would be appropriate and would probably, in my mind, fill a role of trying to amplify your implementation efforts. The Water SC Committee, is my understanding, unless it gets expanded, is to write a report that describes the state of water resources in South Carolina, identify any areas of deficiency that we see, or that we know of, have a little bit of discussion and provide information to allow the legislative committee to then pick up the ball with that information as information only. We don't have no power to provide that information. But it's to distill the information, get it to the legislative committee and let them look at changes in regulation. The second role of the Water SC is to make sure that the state water plan is completed by December 31st. It does not have a role as far as it's defined right now. My understanding, I stand to be corrected if I'm wrong, doesn't have a role in implementation. It doesn't have a role in the next water plan. You know, when we talk about water quality, an issue that your organization is probably waiting to jump in on. They don't, it's not defined right now that Water SC will have a role that will even exist after it has satisfied its two gubernatorially identified mission charter. Other than that, that's why I think the RBCs have a life. The way they were constructed, the way we envisioned this process originally at PPAC, is these would be ongoing perpetual committees. The members would change, but the committees wouldn't. Having an opportunity to link and merge committees or, basin councils that have common themes would seem to be an appropriate measure. And I would think it would also be appropriate for those to stay active so that after Water SC has expired, has met its charter and completed its task, that there is a group that is still politically viable enough to continue to push for water planning in the state.
But that's a road to the executive, not to the legislative, or it's a road to the legislative, you said.
What's that?
This road that's paved to this group is the road to the legislative, not to the executive.
Well, when you say that, there's the road, the Water SC, we're supposed to write a report. I would suggest that if you put the Saluda, the Broad and the Savannah River delegations together, and have an issue that needs legislative attention, that my little view of the real politics of the situation based on the way representation is in this state and the way the parties, control power. If those basins were able to convince their legislative delegations that something needed to be done, it would be done in very short. Those are the predominant counties in the predominant party, and basically a one-party state.
Okay. And I think when the Broad proposed this similar recommendation, Water SC hadn't even been formed, so they weren't even thinking of what you were thinking. Yeah, which is, it's good. Yeah. Okay. Okay. Then the last strategy here was having to do with education outreach, and we talked about this last time, leveraging existing organizations like Clemson and Extension, like Kiwi Source Water Protection Team, like Hartwell Partners, Clean Water, Anderson Pickens Stormwater Partners, and others to help with education and outreach. So the actions, recommended actions or suggested actions we've come up with for that are to do outreach to group representatives, those groups I just mentioned, assess the value of having them join an RBC meeting, perhaps virtually when you get into implementation, figure out where or if they could help, discuss, what messages you want to get out there. This will be after you've done some type of education outreach plan. And then figure out if there's opportunities to collaborate, where they could help get your message out, use them as a mechanism. Second action there is just to basically develop and implement that coordinated education outreach plan. Any thoughts or comments? Okay. For this objective, and actually we're going to go back and do it for this one too, but while we're here, where possible, we like to add a priority, 1, 2, or 3, or just high or low, or no priority if they're all equal. How would you prioritize these 3 strategies under the objective of promote engagement in the water planning process? What's most important? What's least important? So one's, maintaining diverse membership, one's doing an annual collaboration meeting, and one is education and outreach.
So A is 1.
B is 1. What others think?
I would agree with that, 'cause that seems more immediate.
Yeah. Kind of immediate and ongoing.
Ranking of 1, 2, 3, is that what it is?
Ranking of 1, 2, and 3, yeah.
No cost.
What was that?
No cost.
No cost, yeah.
No, that's it.
No, there's a cost.
Yeah.
at least plain and simple.
What about between B and C? What do you think's more of a priority, or are they equal priority?
Collaborate, you got anything with.
Yeah, I could argue too, if you don't do education outreach, then nobody hears your message.
I would, my order would be 1, 3, 2.
1, 3, 2, yeah, so you think this one would be second, oops. That one would be third. What,
I would agree with that, because then in a collaborative meeting, you could include your education and outreach strategies that you are implementing or trying to implement.
Yeah.
And talk about what other things.
that's a good point. Part of that meeting, you might talk about what's worked for you, or what organizations have been useful to get your word out, so having done that ahead of time makes sense. Okay. We'll put those in as drafts again. When you read chapter 10, which will give you all before the next meeting, you can rethink this. If you have other ideas, you're welcome to hear them as we finalize the draft. Going back to objective 5, improved drought management. You want to set a priority on these 3 strategies. The first one was a blanket strategy that all RBCs have made, which is recommending that utilities update their drought response and management plans. The second one was developing materials and doing education to public suppliers to encourage the strategies that are in chapter 8. And the third one was different altogether. It's nevertheless important, encouraging the Army Corps to implement and reestablish the phase 2 study and finish that. Any priority you want to assign to those 3 strategies?
1, 2, and 1.5.
1, 2, and 1.5.
Somebody's got to throw outside the word.
That, the last one was gonna take a long time and a lot of discussion, so
Yeah, it should get it
why
started.
not start? Well, at some point, it's almost a separate action.
Yeah. Again, you can also prioritize these high, medium, low if you want to. You don't want to put them in order. Up to you. Why are we prioritizing, I guess? Question always comes in my mind. I guess in my mind, you're prioritizing because when you go to have your first couple of meetings about what strategies and actions you want to work on, it's easy to say, okay, well, we decided this one was the most important. Let's start with this. That's what we're doing right now. But doesn't mean it's etched in stone. Conditions can change, or priorities can change, or money could open up. That would mean one of your lower priority actions would be easier to implement.
So I'm a little confused, to be honest. A and B are very similar. One's talking about an outreach campaign to encourage what is in A. However, the 5-year actions appear to limit the water utilities that are on RPC. So is A overall a general recommendation for all utilities, or is it specific to the utilities that are sitting on the RPC to be leaders and examples in their particular watersheds?
Yeah, the way the action's written, I think it's more for them to kind of be leaders and at least get the utilities that are on the RBC to update their plans. But the goal is to get everybody in the basin to update their plans.
The reason I ask if that changes the order,
Yeah, you're right. Yes, that would.
because if you would do outreach before, you would ask for completion and submittal. But if it's specific to the utilities being leaders and leading by example, then it's a venue, because you would outreach based on what the
Right.
case, kind of case study showed.
The way our actions are written, I think that's probably the way it would be, but we can revise the actions if we want to match a different approach, but. So I think what I'm hearing is that, this would be the most important one. This is also important, but do you want to make the third one, second importance. And then this one, 3, or do you want to say high, medium, or low?
He doesn't like fractions.
What was that, Harry? I don't like 1.5. No, I didn't like 1.5. Doesn't work well in my brain.
You're the engineer. Come on.
Halfway between some.
I like high and then medium, but I just don't like decimals. It's your plan. You guys can do whatever you want. Any preference? Any strong opinion?
Not unless it's guiding timelines. Right, so if
Yeah.
you're prioritizing based on what gets done first, maybe the answer is different. If you're prioritizing, as you seem to be indicating in some fashion of what's important. Because they can happen at the same time, but once you label 3, so it's just a little,
Right. And then
what do the numbers mean?
Compared to 1, 3, 2.
I'm good with 1, 3, 2. No, still accomplishes my order.
It's original.
Yes. That's kind of why I like high, medium, or low. It doesn't really say one's above another. It says this is, we want to start on this one, but we're going to start on 4 or 5 things at the same time. We're not going to start on this and then do this and then do this and then do this. But again, it's all subject to change once you start trying to implement this stuff.
You're in trouble with most people when you start converting it to English and you hear low. Usually.
Then they don't even do it. Yeah.
We're not gonna get to that one.
Yeah. Okay. We prioritized the other strategies already, except we did do one thing here. This is under the objective, improve technical understanding of water resource management issues. So there's a lot of different strategies and actions we talked about that address your recommendations. One here was about, water quality. This one was about future land use changes and how those impact stream flow characteristics, stream flow quantity, using that to prioritize conservation properties. We ranked that as the second objective. The third one was fund all existing and future state recommended stream flow gauges. Fourth one was continue to look at discussion of data needs for flow ecology. But we moved one under this category, which again is improved technical understanding, that was under this objective, protect water resources. We felt it kind of better aligned with this overall objective than it did protect water resources. So we moved it here, we needed to reprioritize it. This one had to do with identifying the financial impacts of increased sedimentation on reservoirs and water resources, and then communicating those results to local governments that demonstrate the value of riparian buffers, value of sediment erosion control measures, and other policies that reduce sediment generation and transport. You want to slide that in as a priority somewhere in between these? Is it last priority? What do you think? Kind of follows after this one, so can't really put it before 2. But any thoughts?
I mean, it depends on the study is important, but we don't know the impact yet. And so if it turned out to be a high impact, we might address it quickly.
Yeah, you don't know until you do the study.
Yeah, I think the study is important.
Mm-hmm. How about we move it, kind of between 2 and 3? Kind of follows after 2,
Definitely, at least moving into or 4.
ahead of 4 at least.
I would advocate for it to be a little bit higher. I would say.
I'll say 3.
3. Okay. Let's give it a 3. Move that down. Move that slightly down. Doesn't mean that, still can't continue to advocate for funding for stream flow gauges. It's not like a one or the other type of question here. Okay, so I think we've got individual priorities on each strategy. That brings us then back to the prioritizing the overall strategies. The different RBCs have taken this or done this different ways. Just looked at how the Broad did it last night, and they had prioritized just high and medium, I believe. They didn't give anything low, probably for the reason somebody just mentioned, is that it looks like, well, we're not even ever get to that. And they didn't want to rank them. They just said, this is more of a important strategy, or excuse me, objective. This is a little less, but still important. As you prioritize these, though, it doesn't mean that certain strategies and actions within those objectives aren't more important than another one in a different objective. It's just kind of a more big picture prioritization that the framework requests that we do. So, what do you all think? What's the most important objective? Or, well, look at it this way first. How do you want to prioritize these? Do you want to rank them 1 through 6? You want to assign high, medium? You want to assign high, medium, low? Or do you want to just say, we don't want to really prioritize, we'd rather refer to the implementation plan and prioritize the strategies and actions regardless of the objectives, which you've already done?
Where's the strategy question?
Yeah.
I think maybe I'm just missing it, but I don't see anywhere where it says coordinate with the lower Savannah or Georgia.
Maybe we missed it then. I feel like we talked about that last time, but might have not.
Maybe that's why I don't see it. I think we end up kind of generalizing.
I think you made a statement, I don't think we see it here, and I think you made a statement earlier in regards to the PD's recommendations. When we were talking about the recommendation for RBCs to coordinate, collaborate, that the PD had something similar but involved North Carolina. I don't remember capturing, although it was part of the discussion. I don't remember seeing the coordination with Georgia. I don't know what the PD's recommendation states, but you can look at that language maybe and create something similar for the Georgia perspective.
I'm just trying, because I want to make sure we didn't leave it out of actually chapter 9. Yeah, so we've got it as a policy one here, but I think Tanya, right. I don't think we worked it into the implementation plan. So we do need a specific strategy and action around this recommendation.
Should make an objective 2, maybe.
Yeah, that's probably the best place for it. Either 2 or 6, but I think you're right, probably 2.
I guess my other question, does it make sense to include the feds in that too? Or just Georgia and the lower Savannah, since those are existing water councils?
Whatever y'all think.
So you have 4 functioning water councils between the 2 states that include the whole basin. But then you also have, but that's all the volunteer groups. But there's also, the different agencies.
Does it fall under 6, right? 'Cause that's where your dialogue came up, that you said the PD did something a little bit different. We were in the 6 area where it's engagement. You want engagement as well as coordinating. It's not which one, but that's where your conversation.
It kind of falls under both. I mean, not sure it makes a lot of difference where you put it as long as it's in there.
You do have the number B, or letter B, I guess. Future water planning efforts to consider increased collaboration between all of the RBCs. Maybe you could just flesh that out a little bit to say Georgia and the Savannah should specifically work with the lower Savannah.
Including neighboring states.
There you go.
Like North
That would work.
Carolina and Georgia.
There you go.
I think you need to include the Corps of Engineers. Because then they won't be able to say you left us out.
Yeah, definitely, definitely.
Not that they're gonna play, but.
You're right here, buddy. You gotta show up.
At least, well, that's right of the park.
Point about the agent, other agencies too, because one of them can hit a stop. But you're right, you gotta have a core.
What kind of actions would we want to assign to that? Try to encourage joint meetings with Savannah, Upper Ogeechee, coastal Georgia, regional councils.
Yeah.
So work with,
At least one a year where you're trying to promote. It'd be cool if all four got together at least once a year for a discussion.
the frequency at which the regional councils are gonna be meeting.
The goal is quarterly for the regional councils to meet in Georgia. So that's usually kind of the time they meet.
And Ashley, knowing Georgia, and I heard from Tanya last night on what you believe their state of mind is, right? Since you're doing water planning from their side, do you have any recommendations on the best strategy to not just meet? All right, so we meet annually, and that's a great thing, but how do we actually collaborate?
Work together.
Yeah.
Honestly, it's almost kind of like get on the invitation list, and show up at the meetings. That's, I think, the best way. They meet quarterly and show up and engage and have a voice there at the meetings because there's opportunity, they're public meetings. So I think that's the best route.
Show up at their
Show the
meetings
Yeah.
and have an annual.
Yeah, and
meeting.
right now, I think all of them are hybrid, so they, I'll offer a virtual option. I'm not sure if that's gonna continue, but yeah, show up at the meetings. And I can give you information on how to get on the list through the .gov delivery system, so you're at least notified, even if it doesn't come, as an invitation, you're aware of when the meetings are happening.
So have maybe RBC representation from the lower and upper Savannah participate in Georgia. Meeting some planning and hold some collaborative, at least annual meeting of the minds.
Yeah.
Yeah, and invite them over.
Yeah, I mean, like, just for instance, like during, I think the past 2 decades of Georgia water planning before, South Carolina got, started. We reached out to Scott with Carter. He attended meetings and we engaged and collaborated and that was kind of, I think, the beginning. So there's a relationship that was established, but I think, ongoing to just. Yeah, definitely, not just on Scott.
Well, this almost sounds like a two-part recommendation to me, because I know that I didn't see it on here either, but I know that we talked about identifying who's missing from our RBC table and cultivating that industry or just area that's empty. So would that include getting Georgia engagement in our RBC? So it's almost like we want to grow and cultivate the group, but we also want to have interbasin collaboration.
Could be part of it, yeah.
And you mean as far as like active, like council representation as a part, you mean as a part of the planning committee or just engagement? I mean,
Other issues like them that come up in these meetings that we do have.
I wouldn't say issues,
All right, she's gonna speak as a contractor, I will be a road keeper for a second. The Hyundai facility in Savannah.
Okay, so
So they just, there was just a legal agreement that they're gonna switch over sooner to the Savannah River. You also have the next deepening, a widening, you have like 5 huge projects. Yeah, so, yeah, and then,
there's a need, right? I think there's,
Just moved out.
yeah.
and then you also have Franklin, like you do have pockets on the Georgia side that have already identified that there's not enough water for what they want the forecast. So that is not, it is somewhat reflected in what we have here because of the stuff, but having somebody that goes to each one of the meetings would make a huge difference. Because it's usually just me,
Okay, they have a thirsty city.
that very thirsty cities, and we have lots of data centers. So we have thirstier cities.
What's Sunday's daily requirement?
Do what?
What's Sunday's daily requirement?
No, with their fully functioning, well, it's enough that, they gotta get off the offer. Yeah, all Hyundai, so that the original agreement, it was that Hyundai was gonna have a 25-year time span to find another water source. And that just got expedited. It was always kind of gonna be the Savannah, but the Savannah's gotta move its intake. They can't, like, it's gangbusters on the Georgia side. And what I said yesterday, and I'm being dead serious, they've hired Catherine Hagel to come over. That's not the right last name. Zitch. And she's the one that completed the water wars between Alabama and Florida, and Atlanta won. And she has now been relocated to work on the Savannah. So if South Carolina is not ready and doesn't really understand what's happening over there, that water is gonna be gone. Because that's what just happened in Savannah. I mean, they took all the water in a year and a half, 2 years, without anybody even knowing what's happening.
So that's really the biggest, the uncontrollability from South Carolina side, the uncontrollability of Georgia
100%.
is the biggest threat.
100%.
I mean,
Yeah, because Savannah's about to eat up Statesboro.
That's right.
okay.
They already did. Like, it's crazy. You have senators. It is, I would not move to Savannah. There's no way. There's no way. But I just overall, they need to hear from this side. And y'all need to hear from them so that people understand, so that the city of Franklin isn't continually trying to get more permits so that they can sell water to Atlanta. Because that's really what they're trying to do, is run through different water treatment facilities to be able to tap into Atlanta. And I need Greenville to be telling them that that's not. But that's that's inter-basin transfer too, so.
They're doing it.
It's a sticky way, you know, but
Like for the
I'm
courts.
just saying. Anyways, I'll stop talking, but that's like, I just need, I need it to be more than just me. With each one of these.
Is there a new surface water intake for that plant already?
Is there what?
Is there a surface water intake
For the Hyundai facility? No, it's all,
plan soon, but not in place?
no, it's all, aquifer. So Bullitt County built up wells. And Hyundai had 25 years to use those wells. So the real trick is that doesn't mean that the Bullitt County still has access to that water. Hyundai just has to move to the river. So really, in essence, they doubled the water.
The question is who's gonna be their intake? Will Hyundai put in their own straw, or are they pulling water from one of the municipalities?
Well, the goal right now, I think is.
Years ago, with saltwater intrusion, they began digging new wells around Savannah. I mean, that's been a problem for years.
Yeah, which is why they went 150 yards outside of the zone.
Yeah, I mean, you can dig wells, but you can't, nature's gonna tell you about the water, not them.
I missed that answer. Sorry.
So there was an exclusion zone, and they went, I think it's like 150 yards. It might be a little bit farther than that, outside of the exclusion zone to build the wells.
No, back to the straw. Where would they, are they putting, would they be requesting?
Maybe
Georgia?
Clio area?
I missed the answer. So-
He's saying they've developed a regional water commission.
That's my understanding of the intent right now, is to create a regional system. Would it take water from the Savannah? Yes, it takes water from the lower Savannah River. I haven't seen the exact flow numbers, but once we get a good distance below Augusta, the Savannah is flowing well above its historical non-impaired flow levels, which is 100% honest with that. The low level on the Savannah in 1906, 1912 area, times before the dams were in place was, in 1,000 CFS. And then we had what minimum flows coming out of Thurman, 35 is the lowest they can ever go.
Well, yeah, about 30, 36, 35, yeah.
So, I mean, the impacts are going to be on Savannah, it will be on the harbor, in all likelihood, if there are any impacts. The other is, my understanding is this intake, even for this regional group they're talking about, doesn't sound significant. It doesn't, I mean, the counties that would be participating, the communities that are participating are small. Hyundai would be the predominant customer. That's who's going to pay. I think Georgia's going to pay for it for Hyundai. It's just, I don't know if it's going to be a significant impact. That's what I'm saying. On the volume of water that flows past the proposed intake area on that part of the zone.
You can't get 36,000 CFS.
I'll tell you where it's gonna affect you is the cylinder capacity. That's where it's gonna end up getting.
Exactly.
Is that it's gonna end up messing up the oxygen even more. And that's when they turn to the industries and the municipalities and tell you, you have to upgrade to get that water cleaner by the time that it gets there.
Well, they already had to build that in Colton to help
For city of Savannah.
for deepening.
I'm not disagreeing, there's a lot of water. I'm saying Savannah, using every opportunity to use it up.
But if you look at, if it starts impacting water quality, my understanding of the way the regs, the standards that are in place, is the South Carolina standards, more stringent than the Georgia standard. The worst that would happen is you force Georgia to up their standard and have fun. And I don't know if South Carolina would consider that bad thing. We argued forever today to get them to agree that the standard of 1 wasn't the same as 1.0. Because of the way rounding them.
Isn't there an agreement?
They can get away with 14, which is, as in South Carolina, it was 10.4, the way around.
I mean, I haven't looked at it in a while, but with that oxidation facility they put in, how has that been working? I haven't really seen any data in a long time.
So the course changed its tune in the last 6 months, but the data says it doesn't work. It dropped down, it was regularly in 1.6 throughout the summer. They were continually non-functioning. They say now, leading in, they just got funding for the next harbor deepening feasibility study. And originally it was, we need to come up with a different alternative. Now all of a sudden it's no, we think we can continue to tweak them and they'll work. But the reality is, I'm sure you were getting the updates, everybody was getting updates regularly. We're at 1.6 for days on end, or we're, 2 point, like, so they're not currently functioning.
Okay.
The oxygen level's gone back up. Do you disagree with what I'm saying?
I haven't kept up with
Have you seen them?
levels,
Yeah, I mean,
but I'm not surprised.
they're gonna build more.
You have a question?
No, I was just going back to similar capacity, and I think we misremembered, but there's a formal agreement between the states.
There's a 5R with the EPA.
And that'll have to be reviewed if there is a withdrawal or, discharge, I guess, from that. So.
Well,
That'll be part of this process.
it would have to exceed what the states have already been allocated, or they'd have to take it from somebody else. So either international paper could say my permit allows for another 40, whatever, and so I'm gonna give it to this new intake. And so what you end up with is more discharge just because they have that leniency in the permit.
understanding that was the agreement they kind of forged on the wars and be able to swap their pollutant ones.
Carbon offset, the equivalent of carbon offset.
But that's back to what I was saying. If you had something that impacted, it would almost necessitate the Georgia side, which are the predominant ethanol, producers on the Gulf Island. You just have to tighten your standards up. No, that's necessarily a bad thing.
Okay, back to our implementation plan. I guess there's one opportunity, because the Georgia Regional Council has just updated their plans this past year.
June.
June of last year, and they're finishing your plan. If South Carolina goes on a similar 5-year cycle and there's funding to continue to update your plans, kind of going to be on the same cycle. Georgia is going to continue to do the 5-year cycle. Is that right?
That's our understanding.
Yeah.
There may be some adjustments.
I guess my point is there may be kind of parallel planning going on. If both states continue that, maybe that's an opportunity to collaborate as you're each coming up with your individual plans. Try to review others' work. I don't know. Whatever you can do to collaborate.
Yeah, and I would add too, that even in, the interim of the plan updates for Georgia, there's, PD, assigned liaison for each region that, you can consistently reach out to, even if that's someone that you want to be, the person that we invite to the South Carolina council meetings. So that he's involved, and then, there's just that a main contact person that you could always reach out to in the interim of their plan reviews or plan updates.
The vanguard of the problem is in the lowest down,
I would say yes.
Okay, well, Tanya, we've added a little more definition to the action then of just trying to collaborate with Georgia Regional Water Planning Council. Is there anything else you want to suggest there to make sure we cover that recommendation, chapter 9?
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay. Okay, let's go back to then deciding if we can prioritize our overall 6 objectives. Any thoughts on?
Are we looking for this high medium? Is that how or are we?
I think whatever you-
discussing on how?
Yeah, that's kind of where I started. Do you want to do high, medium, or do you want to assign 1 through 6?
As I sit here and stare at this, and objective 4 is the overarching goal of everything that we're discussing is now.
Yes, I mean, sort of, yeah,
At the end of the day.
right. And I guess you got to kind of think of what are the individual strategies under each objective and which ones are more important than others, and then assign that to the overall objective, perhaps.
Like Harry said, number 6, nobody can look at it because we don't win, place or show, it's not important, right?
I feel like number 3 is what you need in order for the others to be able to happen effectively.
But the one that really takes action, I think, is when you discuss this meeting. That's the one that says that we have to have things in place and demonstrable good use of water.
Yeah.
And
So when thinking about the ways that we have prioritized the strategies in here already, I guess I would be hesitant to further prioritize, because then if you have priority 6, but the first objective under priority 6 was ranked 1, where does that fall? In ranking against all the other high priority ones? Is that the 6th high priority, or is it equal with another high priority one?
Yeah.
that's what we're reading.
Good place to show.
They're all high. I don't understand this part. I'll be completely honest. I'm not sure prioritizing this part actually produces any tangible results in our space to the comment just made.
I agree. The work's gonna have to be done in the individual strategies. And I don't know how you pick one of those over. How you pick one strategy, number one, versus another one to start with. Well, you're not gonna do it serially, you're gonna have parallel efforts, so it's difficult.
Well, and I mean, we can
At least
also
you're better,
say,
you're never gonna get them.
I feel like these are the objectives that came out of all of these meetings that we prioritized.
Sure.
Could we prioritize in terms of either like cost to implement or amount of time that we think it would be, like ease versus difficulty, overall difficulty?
You can, and I haven't even been, just to keep it simple, I haven't even been showing you the rest of the implementation table, but we've tried to put in just a budget range for actions, strategies where appropriate. So some of these have information, some of them just don't have a
Rather than
budget.
ranking or prioritization, I mean, what the title says, it's justification, so to me, it's like with 2 sentences, and I've heard a couple of them, and like I said, the overarching is protect water resources, but without having the technical understanding, it's kind of more of a why this subjective is the headline with the strategies below it.
What you discussing the rationale, yeah. I mean, you can parade over the thing and say, okay, what's the 80-20 split? Let's get the top 20 and put that prioritize those. There's a bazillion ways that you can actually look at it.
Yeah. This is just the example from the broad. They did high, medium, and there's their justifications. I don't know if that's helpful to you at all, but and they prioritize the improved technical understanding, the technical studies as kind of a lower. I mean, they gave it a medium, but they said it was lower than those other ones. Again, that's just what they did.
I mean, all of those justifications could be put in the paragraph, and we don't need to add the prioritization necessarily.
Yeah, if that's what you want to do. I'm not sure what use it is other than the planning framework. It says we should be trying to do it. And you came up with the planning framework, so that's why we're trying to do it.
All righty.
So that what you
Wow.
I just to be blunt, I mean.
What else did we do in that committee? Oh, yeah, we hired.
You make it even stay.
No, this has been a similar discussion in the other RBCs, is they kind of struggled with prioritizing too. So I don't want to force it on you all. If you want to kind of just justify why they're important, but not assign a priority, I don't see what the problem is.
Because I believe in my space, they're all high, and that's why they are headliners. And the other strategies fall below, which we have kind of prioritized.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, I don't, when you go to do implementation, I don't think you're going to be, if there's funding for something, even though it's a lower priority, you're going to take advantage of that funding and use it. So in that regard, the prioritization doesn't really have a lot of meaning. So, okay, if everyone's comfortable with that, we'll write up justification based on the discussions about each strategy and action within those objectives, and we'll leave it at that, and we will note that the RBC elected not to prioritize the overall objectives. Is everybody good with that? Okay. Okay. 11:14. Let's do a 10-minute break, and then I think we can quickly go through progress metrics. That shouldn't take that long. Lunch, and then we'll just do a quick look at the draft chapters and talk about a few comments that Mark and Harry submitted, and then we'll wrap it up for the day. So it's 11:15, 14. We'll come back at 11:25. Online, folks.
Sure.
Nobody put anything in the chat, did they, about? Okay.
Right.
Tanya gets, let me see if she wants to.
think so.
Gary, could I just send an email to the engineer? What we got mentioned at the top of it?
Over there, this could be it. A whole new, whole new curve to attract people.
That's right.
It probably is the high point.
Tanya, before we start progress metrics, was there another recommendation on the implementation plan that you wanted to mention?
So what he just said was, I think, a pretty good point, which was that, in maybe in the executive summary or at the beginning, to make sure that we identify that there is a scenario where Savannah, that South Carolina could run out of water, and part of this plan is helping identify and make sure that we're putting measures in place so that that viability continues. So that we're not in a place where if something goes wrong, then people are looking to point fingers and say, well, you said there's plenty of water at all times. Which I do think is what Lower Savannah Council is facing right now with the Hyundai facility, because that's exactly what's happened and why they just revamped the whole thing. So that was the point.
Okay. That's a good point. We'll talk about that when we do a quick look at chapter 7, because we've added just a short discussion on adaptive management and changing conditions, kind of like you just suggested, like, oh, suddenly Hyundai's gonna pull in water out from Savannah. We hadn't really thought about that in our modeling. Is that important? And as you continue to do planning, you need to reassess things like that.
Yep.
Okay.
Just a quick question, how much water are they?
I'll look it up.
Well, then you need for that region,
Well,
that's built, that's, well, initially, maybe wrapping it up to 20 foot. But that is not just for Hyundai, that's for 3 or 4 other counties down there.
our objective is really to stay out of court. I said, our objective is really to stay out of court. I mean,
Yeah.
you know, well, because if you end up in court, it's gonna be a lot more, because there's really a lot going on. And so that if there's something going on there about courts, that, then if we can make, if we can not do that, we can make claims beforehand that was.
Yeah. Okay, I want to talk about progress metrics. This is another thing that's included in the planning framework that we want to identify. If you remember, at the very beginning, we had developed process metrics, and we've reviewed those at least once, maybe only once, maybe twice, as we've been moving along to make sure we're meeting those process metrics. Progress metrics are a little different, and we've always moved them to the end of the RBC discussion as we're finalizing the plan, because in my mind, they're more appropriate for implementation activities. The planning framework defines progress metrics as benchmarks used to monitor success or failure of an action taken by an RBC. And again, at least in my mind, I always felt like, well, that's more specific probably to implementation. So with that in mind, at least in the other RBCs, we've been developing progress metrics to help you track how effective are you in implementing what's in your plan. So we've taken the liberty to suggest some progress metrics, and I want you all to weigh in and say, no, that's not a good metric, or let's tweak it, or say you like it. That sound okay? So they're organized kind of by objective, and there's usually 1 or 2 metrics under each objective. The first one's improve water use efficiency to conserve water resources. And the first metric would be that municipal ag water conservation efficiency strategies are considered, evaluated, and implemented. On the municipal side, a 5-year reduction in residential per capita demand is realized, and water utility financial strength is maintained. Any comments on that as a metric? So that metric assumes that you're monitoring. We have this as a strategy and an action. You're monitoring per capita use to the extent that you can. So you're tracking it and trying to decide, are we lowering our per capita demand, and is it because of strategies that we've pushed and that have been implemented? And at the same time, as you're lowering demand, you're not impacting your utility's financial strength. That's been a concern in other RBCs. What do you think?
So this is a progress metric, which means it's visible. It's, you know, out visible to all, right? And we wouldn't know, it couldn't be a progress metric if this was internal, because it's saying municipal and agricultural water conservation efficiency strategies are considered, evaluated, and implemented. On the agricultural side particularly, that's done internally, behind closed doors. You guys don't report any of that currently to anybody, do you?
Well, they report their use,
Yeah,
but you know, their use is heavily driven on climate, right? So
Yeah.
it's hard for them to decide what we implemented useful, but I think they'll know, you know, they'll go out and do a water audit of a center pivot system, not in this basin probably, but
Well, like the guy said last night, I mean, okay, you want to talk about ag, but the only time, like several of them said, the only time ag uses water when there's a drought. The rest of the time, no one said it right. We're the sponge. We're the filter for all the runoff and all the development. So when you start saying that municipal, okay, it's going to be defined. There's going to be constant usage more or less. And I know it varies, but okay, that's going to be something that's kind of going along, kind of like consumption. But your ag is going to be, I mean, is it going to be something measured the same and the same strategy as municipal? I don't see how.
My whole thing on that metric right now, we're waiting to see it's not going to be very reflective because we're not talking about it, because you are talking about ag is something that doesn't use water. When the water is there, they don't use it. I mean, they look really efficient in some years and other years they don't. If your goal is to show a 5-year reduction, that's nice. Tell me what the weather's gonna be, and I'll tell you if you're gonna make it. I can also tell you if you're gonna show an increase. You know, if we start our baseline numbers right now, in a dry period, which we had last year, and then year 5, we happen to have a normal year, we're gonna easily make our metric. It doesn't mean we did anything.
There's a technical question. Is there any way, like, if you could normalize energy, residential energy usage every day, so
That's so.
pretty, is it, can we normalize it?
yeah. So you can, I think we've done that before in other studies where we've tried to normalize it based on how much precipitation you get or how little you get. So you're comparing apples to apples.
Yep.
But it's not an exact science.
But it's been done as possible. At least I can explain better.
The longer your time series, the more accurate your number is. That's the simple. I'm looking at it. I think I appreciate the intent to have a metric. I will tell you that sometimes just measuring it and reporting it as part of your educational programs has the impact you want. But if you just say you're going to do a 5-year per cap number on M&I, tell me what the weather's going to be in year 1 and year 5, will tell you if you make it or if you fail. If you look good or look bad, and I don't care what you do. I don't care if you abolish all leak detection programs and don't talk about conservation at all, or if you go full Atlanta and say, you know, nobody's allowed to have grass. It's all entirely weather dependent. It's the same, going to be the same in agriculture. I mean, this past year, and I'm not going to say, I won't even say if, the gentleman, and we're all gentlemen that were farmers last night, we got up and stood and talked about the importance of agricultural irrigation water this year. This year's the base year. And year 5 is not a dry year. They're going to easily meet the standard. And it doesn't mean they did anything. And I'm not saying that they're not doing anything because all of them also did something that I had asked you, which is they came in and they quoted their irrigation efficiency numbers. So the ag community is doing what I had asked. I mean, they have the numbers. They can justify that they are being efficient with their use, but they only need it when it's not there. Well, that's really the whole point of irrigation in agriculture.
It's a moving target.
Yeah, well, they only need it when it's not there.
All this, so what's the purpose of the metric, the project? It's like say what you're saying, we can correlate, man, we can get all kind of data, but how relevant is it?
When it comes to ag, the metric I would propose is that you start collecting that irrigation efficiency number from the farm, from the ag community, And that for those that are, whatever the standard is, I mean, last night they were saying 93, 94. Is that right? Right? All right, let's just say that our goal is to identify those that aren't at that standard. And to raise those to the standard. In other words, if there's somebody that's at 85, let's get them to 90. Let's get them to the standard, whatever the industry standard is.
Okay, fine, you bringing that out, we don't want to get off point if we do, we're bringing us back in line, but when you start telling me, okay, this guy's got this efficiency. This guy over here hadn't changed his sensitivity. I go back to the tractor analogy that I always like to use. Tractor I got, she's not, those old 4,000 series John Deere are not environmentally friendly. They pour the smoke because they're burning fuel. The new one's better. Everybody mandates the new one, but you shouldn't come along and tell the guy that's got the old equipment,
No,
oh, no. That's the path you starting down. When you start saying, we gotta have this standard and we gotta use it, then you're gonna tell this guy 5 years from now, oh, you gotta spend this much money because it's not, because you're hurting society because you don't save enough water.
we're not a regulatory body. I'm saying, if you want to know if you're moving in that direction, as your equipment expires, and this is a thing we've discovered on the M&I side. All right, water conservation on M&I has been ongoing. We've seen decreasing demands on water, even for utilities that have never even used the word conservation or even used the word efficiency. Why is that? We changed the plumbing code in 1993 so that no matter who you are, if you're in the United States, you're by definition, you're being more efficient because you can't buy a toilet that flushes 5 gallons. If you want to get 5 gallons of water going down the toilet, you're going to flush 2 or 3 times. All right? You just can't do it. You want to take a shower that uses the showers that you grew up with? You're going to have to take the shower head off the end because you can't buy a shower head that produces that much unless you take the shower head off and drill the holes yourself. All right? You can't buy a washing machine that uses it what it used to use, or a dishwasher. All right. The point is, over time, those improvements have taken place. I would argue the same thing on agriculture. I'm not saying that you have to go replace everything right away. If you track the overarching average number across the state and you say, our goal is to move upward so that if there's one that's 85%, an old, but 85% over a 10-year period or a 20-year period, whatever the period of replacement is, you just don't produce any of those old inefficient designs anymore. And then they move up naturally with normal replacement. That's not regulatory, that's market driven.
The only thing is, I've seen it in other industries. If you're not careful, you're going to open Pandora's box into being a social society that's going to tell me what kind of truck to drive or anything else, or what kind of toilet. And we've done that. Yeah, Speed Queen, by the way, I don't endorse anything. Speed Queen still makes one that get close to it, but there are not many left.
But aren't we just afraid of data? I mean, in a certain sense, collecting the data is the camel's nose under the tent for regulation. You can't regulate what you're not measuring, and so once you start collecting the data, then sometimes there's a natural fall toward regulation just because you're collecting data. So a lot of people, I think in terms of the bulwark against regulation being data collection.
So let's use that to bring it back to subjective. It's hard objective to me just because it's hard to collect the data to decide, are you lowering this for multiple reasons? One, because of changes in climate between your baseline and the point you're measuring. And two, as I think we've talked about this in this RBC, it's hard to come up with, even for the municipal side, a residential per capita demand number. Some utilities said they can provide that, others just don't know. So
To capture water supply, water loss in this, or is that some other metric? Meaning,
that would be here.
I know,
We want to put
I
that
know
here.
large water utilities
Mhm.
in this room, that is something that they're very much focused on, and it's in their best interest in everybody's to reduce.
Yep.
We do have some of our smaller rural communities that water loss numbers are, less than acceptable.
Mhm.
We should see improvement there. That is something that
Yep.
is collected and such and so forth. I didn't know if that was captured here. If we're gonna be looking at irrigation specifically, that's a space in the water supply, that's a little bit more specific. Is it driven by just efficiency. It's driven by actions and activity and, you know, infrastructure replacements and.
Yeah.
Et cetera, et cetera.
So that may be a better metric. I mean, that leak detection and water loss control programs were a second priority in our municipal conservation measures. You know, we said water education, public education was first, and then pricing structures and leak detection was the second priority. And since that's one that we can measure, if utilities are doing leak detection programs and they come up with a percent loss, we could add that as a metric to measure, are we being effective in finding money for these utilities to do that and encouraging them to do that? So you want to put that as a metric in place of this? That seems like a good idea. It's easier to measure. And it is focused just on utilities, but we left ag out of here because ag's not really a big user in the basin. And I wasn't sure that it's even worth putting a metric together, given that there's very little, if any, center pivot. It's all kind of specific to the yeah, lower part is, but I couldn't come up with a metric that was useful for ag that even be worth doing, given that ag use is so small. Do you want to try to do a water loss and leak detection metric?
Useful one.
Okay, what would the metric look like? Just a improvement in, just to see a 5-year improvement perhaps, or is there enough that have done them that you can have a baseline?
I would suggest an initial goal wouldn't be to say it's show an improvement. I would suggest that it would be to ensure that all utilities actually have conducted at least a baseline water loss program. Because there's the standards that are there. I mean, the standards have moved on how you assess what.
Are they required? Are we required to have a baseline? I mean, it's part of the sanitary survey process, is it not? Yeah, I mean, I realize it's not necessarily effective in its current, but it's supposed,
And
it's
that's
there.
what- And that's what I'm saying. You're talking about over 5 years. I mean, yeah, you tell us we have to come up with a water loss number or drinkable water. Yeah, we get you one. We put resources on it, but some of the folks that you represent may struggle to do that within a year or two. And to say you want to trend something, you're not going to get enough data to trend. I think if you were to say initially is everybody to determine what your water loss percentage is and try to come up with at least a 2 or 3 year baseline number so that in year 6, 7, and 8, you can start ramping down. Right now, I don't think the numbers exist. Well, I think the numbers that do exist are generated on varying standards, so they're not comparable.
In the latest water law software, it's got rid of percent water loss.
Yeah.
You don't declare percent water loss. The rating.
And when I first started, everybody would say, if you ever hit 10%, don't try. You just don't try.
So the new software.
You start looking at this.
Spits out what, a rating? Like you're like,
It's a rating.
kind of like a bond rating kind of thing?
It's
you're
like a
AAA?
speedometer, like
Yeah.
the speedometer tells you how you compare with respect to the national average.
No physical number.
You can get it all, still, but nobody. That's the latest that came out of last year or the year. and a half
That's
before.
what I'm saying. I don't know if there's a basis to compare. Is what I'm saying. I think the first standard is create something a baseline that you can compare to. And I don't care if it's, everybody's doing acceptable or exceptional, or everybody's 12%, 20%. I don't know how you can do that, but I think getting everybody to a common baseline so you have something that could then track would be step one.
Performing studies, reporting and gathering information over a 2-year period from all water suppliers with the intent of establishing a baseline for future reduction efforts or improvements.
Technical. Yeah.
Metric is how many.
So is the metric just a,
Well, because of the baseline. If for improvement, and improvement isn't based on numbers.
or you want to set the metric to at least have them do it instead of baseline? Or do you want to actually have them set a baseline and then see that there's improvement 3, 5, however many years down the road?
Yes.
The second one.
Both.
So,
Yes. No, you said it. You just didn't know it.
something like that.
Does that then have to be included in the implementation plan? We need to collect. the
Yeah.
data?
Yeah, we wouldn't need to add that as specific action because we don't have that in there now. So right now, we just have kind of generic actions that aren't focused on any one of these strategies.
I would think building it in as a specific action would make it 319 eligible. Like you could use that for 319 funding.
Right.
There's some there. You can chase it all day long.
What's the, Jeff, what's the method called now? Or is it AWA? That's all right. I can look it up later.
Do we need to pick up Scott's point about this baseline? Is there some standard you can use so you actually can combine the results?
In the measurement, there's got to be an opportunity to say you failed. That's what a measurement is in the approach.
1036.
1036.
And that's the water level.
M36.
That's the. Or water on its software six.
What were you saying, Harry? Do we need to set the baseline? Like,
Well, I'd like to pick up Scott's point about, if you're gonna develop a baseline and looking across the basin, you'd like to at least feel that they're all using the same process or something that can actually combine the results and get something that means something. Where somebody has a standard this small and the guy has standard that big. I don't know if there's some internet, some national thing that utilities use that.
well, so this,
Yeah, we use the AWA method.
yeah, this method that he was talking about, the software now doesn't give it by a percent, it gives it by a dial. It is what everybody uses, and there's procedures that they follow so that it's all the same.
It also do data availability score.
There's a lot of folks that are paying attention to it, move to the standardized software. There's still other utilities that are still doing, we do it occasionally ourselves, which is just, what do we produce versus what do we sell? What would we, the minute you do that, then it's like, oh, that's good. I'll tell you right now, just based on the way that we bill and the way our organization set up, our account using that simple method is 0. We're the most efficient water utility.
Congratulations.
Check your meter. I want to be this for 100%.
You want the ag to give you our number?
But what I will tell you is, when we actually look at diving into it and following methodology, we recognize where some unaccounted water goes. Just because we were able to receive payment for all the water we were doing.
Yeah,
There's a method that was commonly used many years ago that is not something you should be doing if you're trying to have a common methodology. You want one that actually tracks loss and account.
You gotta remember too, that you are a wholesaler.
We are, that's what I'm saying. We allocate, we don't bill per unit, we allocate cost.
Yeah.
And the percentage always comes up to 100%. So 100%, we collect. That doesn't mean that methodology, even though it's simple, is correct. And it's definitely not common. And it doesn't, other than us fixing leaks because we don't want to wash away the road, being a wholesaler, that's our problem. We have a leak, it isn't generally just a small leak. It's usually like, well, we either fix it or, I don't know, we close 85.
right.
Small issue. Let's just close 85. That's part of what I said. Let's whatever the standard is, let's adopt the standard and let's all report to this, whatever that standard is, let's all report to that standard. So that you don't have Anderson Regional reporting 0%. And Graybull's over here doing a really good job, thinking they're blocking the world at 10%. And you think, well, they're terrible.
And when we offer technical assistance, we utilize the AWW software as well. So it's pretty.
How many of you, on a percent basis, you've got the largest utility base, not based on numbers, but based on number of utilities. How many have taken advantage of the service as a percent?
For the water lines? Honestly, the majority. That does not mean it's establishing what we're looking for here. They've got the software downloaded on their office computers and have started maybe inputting some data. Whether or not they've gotten
They've used it or not yet?
utilized it without a little bit more assistance and guidance and what have you, but that's a start. But whether or not they're going to that next step of seeing improvement from that data input. There's probably there's less of that.
If the dial says acceptable, they just stop.
I'll write that down for my ag friends. Wait a minute, they downloaded the software. It's a start.
And they input their data. And the next step is working towards improvements. But that's what the same is that we're asking for there is to just to be aware, to start the process by being aware. You can't start the process if you don't know.
Are we missing something in this whole justification though? The farmers that are paying attention to their sprinkler system efficiency. The water utilities that are paying attention to water laws. Industries that are using water. It's all cost. Their motivation, their justification is to reduce the cost of doing business. Where are we discussing that?
You know where where that entire economic argument falls apart? When it comes to the resources, we don't charge for the water. That's the resource is free. The resource is free. The only thing we're charging for, only thing we're all doing is we are minimizing our operational cost income.
Yeah.
If the resource had a cost, then the economic approach works 100%.
That's only true for your particular situation. The majority of utilities that I work with don't have their individual source.
Yeah.
Right? Not the majority, but a good portion are.
They
There's a
get
lot
a
of them are on
They get a
groundwater,
signal.
and it's a cost, but they have to, they're
They get a
paying,
signal.
right, so they're paying you for 3 million gallons.
I'm saying.
If they only sold 1 million gallons,
The people that
It's
are
an
pulling the
expense.
resource out, the people that you're talking about.
Mark brings up
1 gallon, 1 million gallons, 100 million gallons.
I give you an example on center pivots, because everybody says you want to talk about those, and that's in there, everybody sees them. In Kansas, we've all flown, you've seen how many center pivots, how many circles there are. it's been 30 years ago. I was in Kansas and you saw them all and we're going by and all of them, and I finally saw a diesel tank, made in the oil business. Like, yeah, I said, man, yeah, I said, that you finally got one running off a diesel. The guy said, we don't run it much because that SOB will break you. I said, and he told me how much fuel it took to put an inch of water on it. I said, well, you all got me. He said, no. He said, natural gas. He said, that's part of our agreement. He said, natural gas don't cost nothing. We can run that pump. We get all the natural gas in part of their lease agreement with Coke or whoever. So yeah, like Mark says, it all goes back to cost in our world. And like you said on yours, okay, the water's free. We just charge you for
Well,
sanitation.
the water's free even for farming.
Well,
The cost for us to pump it out and deliver it out,
That's the cost I'm talking about, yeah.
that's what I'm talking about.
The resource.
We
is
all,
free.
we all pay our internal cost of our operation, whatever it may be. The resources, and the reason, when we talk about recreation, or environmental protection, they have an interest. They don't have an operational cost. But the resource is still there. It's a common resource. The fish and I'm taking the opposites. I'm taking the contrary view to what my interest group would say. If you were to say those three groups all have a need for water, they have no return. There's no money to be made. You don't get a nickel for the fish. Okay. So they're there for are canoeing down the river. No money really there unless you sell canoes, right? But the water itself is still needed there. The folks that have the ability to generate income based off extractive use of the resource pay nothing. And I'm not saying you should. I'm just saying that's where the full economic argument over resource allocation efficiency fails, and it fails. In that it'll fail on air. It'll fail on anything that's freely available. Because at some point, there's no cost assigned. And all it becomes is an internal cost of our operation. And I'm not saying that's bad. We just have to recognize that. That's why you have to have some level of regulation or some level of something that promotes efficiency. Because the trigger to promote efficient use of the resource,
we've gotten
a big
into
chunk of it's missing.
John's a patient man. I think we're in metric 1.58. John probably wants to get back to 1 and get out of here.
Well, I'm just gonna say, I'm not gonna let you go to lunch until we finish.
And
I'm just curious real quick, if we recognize that we need the loss detection measures to be done. It sounds like you have the software, so that's not a hurdle, but that there is more time and effort that's needed with those small municipalities to be able to do that. If a line item should specifically be that rural water needs to be funded, or somebody, like there needs to be an expanse of funding towards the support for the smaller municipalities to be able to provide what they need.
Comes down to
No?
the technical ability to use the software and the data it develops.
Agreed. So I'm curious, like, that's not gonna happen with the guy that's the dog catcher and the water utility manager. So I'm wondering if we need to put a line item that's like, I don't know who, but if somebody's able to provide that, contract service.
And both liable,
Yeah, well, we have an action. The first action under municipal conservation is identify funding opportunities. We can be more specific there. Well, in part of chapter 10, we've got several tables that talk about funding opportunities.
and you say it's that including provide technical assistance
Yeah.
to underserved communities that might struggle, something along those lines.
Give me a chance to run the measure statement.
I'll just keep it simple. Okay. Okay, so we changed metric 1A. The second metric 1B was just funding opportunities and technical assistance are identified and use them in conservation strategies. You find 3 funding opportunities, and we convinced Jill and her organization to provide technical assistance. That's a metric we can measure.
It's an easy sell.
What was that?
So it's a pretty easy sell.
Yeah.
Considered.
Okay, those good progress metrics for our first objective. Okay. The next objective was communicate, coordinate, promote findings and recommendations from River Basin. And some of those strategies were, develop and implement an engagement plan to improve awareness, work with DES to identify the scope of future activities, push to have a grant program like Georgia's Sea Grant program established to help with implementation actions, and incorporate the different resilience elements, local hazard mitigation plans, all that stuff. Encourage that comprehensive planning processes build in resilience based on all those plans and this plan. So those were the strategies. The metric we had was you all develop an engagement plan within 1 year following completion of this plan. That's not really that much of a heavy lift. Water SC just did an engagement plan, which is basically these 2.5 pages. It kind of just says who you're targeting, how you're targeting them, when you're going to target them. So that's a pretty easy metric to measure. Comfortable with that as a metric? It says check, we've done an engagement plan. We kind of talked about how we're going to do outreach. Okay. Second one is the outreach is effective, prompting legislative actions, decisions, and funding that support implementation strategies and actions. That's a little harder to measure, but that's the point, though. You're trying to enact change, find funding, get your strategies and actions going.
Is that, are we saying that that is also within 1 year, or does that have a time frame on it?
Didn't put a time frame, probably should. Could just be an ongoing annual review,
It's not
ongoing.
How do you measure effect?
whether or not there's legislative action decisions or funding that results from it. And I don't know if that's part of that, as RBC continues on, how we're going to, and I assume that's something that might be statewide or maybe basin specific, but what are we gonna do to track? I see writing down, each sector, the outreach, maybe Upstate Forever is doing outreach on land use planning, riparian buffers. And, Greenville County recently, right, has a riparian buffer. Anderson County lands one through education, that's a metric.
If you're able to,
That's like-
specific to this one, if you're able to convince the legislator to start up a fund like the Sea Grant program in Georgia, then that,
Just check or not check.
Yeah,
I mean,
check that box.
Each of these has to have the opportunity for failure in it.
Yep.
We did not meet the requirements, or we did not meet the measurement.
right,
And so that's how if they fail to fund, then it doesn't.
then you don't meet it. Right.
Would it be clear to say outreach leads to legislative actions, et cetera, et cetera? Doesn't,
This might be a stupid question. I'm sorry, go ahead.
no,
Does legislative just mean state or federal, or can that mean local? Because a lot of the actions would be local changes too, right? I just don't know the word, whether the word's applicable to local.
Yeah, usually when you say legislative to me, I think state.
State or, yeah,
Yeah.
okay, there you go. Okay.
So now it's broader. I mean, now incorporates like the Army Corps, if they decide to fund the finish of the drought plan study, then check. Okay. All right, those good metrics for objective 2. Yes, okay. Objective 3 was technical understanding, improve technical understanding of water resource management issues. We've got the most strategies and actions in this category, so we've got more metrics here. The first one was water quality issues and concerns in the basin are identified and a strategy study approaches to address them is developed. So we said we want to look at water quality in future planning phases. I think the idea is that you need to figure out what you want to look at. What are the most important issues of concern in the basin? If you identify those and then you say, okay, here's what we can do to study them and develop approaches to address them. That would be the second part, developing that strategy. So that's measurable in my mind. What do you think?
Is that, so we're jumping to quality from quantity. Is that what
This particular metric is addressing your strategy that was to identify the quality issues and begin to try to address them. The strategy was future planning efforts should include evaluation of surface water quality and trends, including bacteria, nutrient loading, and sedimentation. Study the impacts of drought on fish kills due to dissolved oxygen. This one's just saying, we've talked about it more, we've decided, here's what we want to study. You know, inherent in that, you're probably gonna have to identify funding or figure out who's gonna do the work. This is just looking at identifying what you want to study and figuring out what the strategy is to do that. Baby steps.
I'm good with it if we put a time line on it. Looking back, is
Yeah.
1 year like we did on the previous one?
Well, and I guess looking ahead, thinking about all these, we haven't really put a timeline because I guess the way I understand these is kind of ongoing. I would consider them every year and you kind of look at your progress metrics. Oh, we made progress here, but we didn't here. Next year you look at it. So just every year.
Is there
And
like some
annually.
kind of paragraph somewhere that states something like that, like annually, we're gonna review our progress metrics? And
Yes.
otherwise, it's out there and nobody ever looks at it.
We'll make that clear when we write this section of chapter 10, if it's not already in the default language we've used in other basins. It may be.
Some sort of like, when that needs some improvement.
Some way to measure or just a general, here's how we're going to grade these metrics, met, failed, needs improvement. Yep, we can do that.
I'm curious if this one is supposed to mean the technical understanding for the state or locals. Because if that is the case, maybe there needs to be a metric in there about the state ensuring that the data that they are collecting is easily available for the local municipalities to make informed decisions. That data democracy piece is kind of missing.
I just remember where we had, your recommendation about data accessibility, availability, don't recreate data, use what's available.
Yeah, make sure that when the state pays for data, it's actually made available.
available and accessible?
Yeah, just so that like,
And so you can jump online and
yeah, so the municipalities aren't, have access to it.
It's a DES thing.
Yeah, so currently, like South Carolina is updating its GIS. It was a really good system, except it actually didn't have data. Like, it was really great. You could find out exactly where the samples were. You went all the way down. It's like, all right, submit it for you. So cool, thanks. So like, but improving that access would make it easier for the local municipalities and for ag and everybody else to be able to understand what's happening around them.
Which you would thought that would be transparent.
Legally, it's supposed to be.
That takes a lot of effort to run a data warehouse essentially.
Yeah.
I think, Tanya, to capture your recommendation, which we included in chapter 9, I don't see a specific action here now, so I think I need to add one to make sure that we encourage DES to address that data accessibility issue that you brought up. So that's separate. That's an action we need to add. How you measure that as a progress metric, I'm not sure. I don't know if you have any suggestions or not. It's hard to measure, I guess.
I think that if they shoot for a certain percentage of the data that they fund being made publicly available with the click of a button, not a FOIA request, would be a metric they could achieve.
What should the number be?
Would that be
100?
captured under metric 3A if we included that as an implementation task? Like if it was explicitly listed in the implementation plan, would that be covered under metric 3A?
Yeah, I think it might be better as a standalone one. She's talking just more about overall data accessibility. 3A is focused just on what's water quality component of the study, future study.
100% is too much. I'd love to have it. They won't do it. That'll make them just not do it.
Yeah, I don't know how they would measure it. I'm not sure if that's gonna be an issue for us or not. I'm putting it kind of as a note. Maybe I need to talk to some of the folks at DES that maintain that data, if it's possible, or if that's what they strive for already. I don't know. But maybe we'll revisit that and come up with something that's useful. Tom?
Tanya Lumbush has her hand up.
Yeah, Tanya, did you have something you wanted to add?
No, I just want to make sure I understand. I'm following for the most part. But we're talking about number 3, which is improved technical understanding of water resource management issues, and metric 3A is water quality issues and concerns in the basin are identified and a strategy. Okay, so is there a part that we are saying what these issues are and they are identified? Like, will we talk about water quality specifically, like aging pipes and, water treatment, old water treatment facilities that need funding for maintenance and like all that stuff? Is that a part of this, or that's gonna lead us to another section? The specifics, I guess, is what I'm asking, those specific issues.
Yeah, the kind of examples that you just gave about aging pipes and stuff is not part of this one. At least that wasn't the intent.
Okay, good. I'm following them. Then I'm good to go. Thank you.
Okay. 3A was focused on, we talked about bacteria, nutrient loading, sedimentation as potential targets of study. But we did keep it kind of general. The idea of 3A is that we've selected what we want to study and considered what available funding you have. Maybe you only have enough funding or support from DES or whoever to do study of nutrient loading. I don't know, but the metric was identified or designed to just again, kind of take baby steps. You've at least identified what you want to study and you figured out, here's how we're going to do that.
So you're gonna address 3E sidebar with some more discussion that might turn into something more along the lines of improved access or something prescribed saying that it should be online.
Yeah.
And
Right.
with the exception of national security concerns, because that is the reason why some of the information isn't published, not dissolved oxygen content, but the water utility roles. But that's the only time I could see that they would withhold the sharing thereof.
Yeah.
Weirdly enough, that's publicly available. I can tell you where all of the intakes are.
Yeah, that's what's kind of surprising is the watershed atlas shows you where all of. A lot of states don't do that. So yeah, it's a little bit of.
But I agree with you that you might not show it,
Yeah. Yeah. Just for sake of time, I'll try to figure out something that's an appropriate metric for.
And then could we add the improved local and state technical understanding in the progress metric? Because I think that was like just adding that word local.
Well, if you want to go back and actually change your objective, I mean, we kept it general. Technical understanding covers five different things.
Okay.
Some of them are local. Some of them's funded, some of them are funding. This one's local. That's local. These are all local technical things, actually.
Cool. All right, I'm good.
Okay.
So, 3B, when we look at our fund, all existing and future state agency recommended stream flow gauges, however, our metric is only measuring that we maintain. That, to me, that means that what's in place, we're not gonna let deteriorate.
Yeah.
Is that enough of a metric, considering we want the stream gauges to not just be maintained, but possibly to be numbers to be improved upon based on recommendations from agencies or others?
Are there stream gauges that are not USGS?
Are there any? Are you saying, are we talking about ones, not just USGS?
Pretty big.
I think here we're just talking about USGS, but there are other options. There's Well, we haven't talked about the,
So if there's other options, you're saying folks that have stream gauges out there, but is it because we don't utilize them for regulatory decision making, but yet they still might feed information into an overall study to make this recommendations and or implementation or something like that? I know we haven't considered it here.
yeah, so we didn't make a recommendation specific to adding non-USGS stream gauges. I think in this basin, we might have talked about Tom mentioned that Clemson had a presentation on what are this boxes called?
Bridge box.
Bridge boxes that are lower cost, not as good data as USGS, but still data, and there's usefulness to those. They're a lot cheaper, put them out, but
They mentioned this.
I don't think they probably do, but you could probably develop a rating curve, but then that adds cost and complexity to it. But again, we didn't develop a recommendation around using that type of approach to collect additional data in the basin. We could, if you want to go back and revisit that. So that's why we're not focusing on a metric for that either. We're just focusing
Hear
on.
from the people that would utilize it and whether or not it was an added benefits. But I believe it, to me, I believe if data is out there, it should be utilized. I understand why it's not used for regulatory or compliance or anything like that. But if it has a certain quality to it that passes the sniff test, I would want to receive the data and analyze and utilize. I don't know if that's being a metric, but I just want to make sure that.
Yeah. In our discussions, I don't think we identified the specific need for additional, not as rigorous flow data, but flow data that would help us with future evaluations. Maybe part of your water quality exploration as part of a next phase, you might need more flow data in non-gauge portions of the streams. And that's when you might decide, oh, we could use I keep calling it black box, but what was
Bridge box.
Bridge box, yeah. Bridge box approach.
In some of our recreational work, we go out as boaters and we evaluate the position and so forth, the buoys and whatnot. We submit those things to NOAA, but NOAA says, okay, I'll go check it out. With the data that we submit are not data. They're not used for navigation or anything necessarily. They're just markers for them to have a look.
And then in metric 3C, it states a method for priority areas for land conservation is developed. However, in my mind, I remember in our discussions, although that goes hand in hand, the discussion was also looking at where to guide developments, not just where to conserve land, but to also see and say, this might not be a huge area for water infiltration, so the paving of this would have less of an impact. There's plenty of water resources available. So I don't know if it's an additional metric or adding on to that metric that you're prioritizing, not just for land conservation, but guidance.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I just kept it at this again to take baby steps, but if you want to look further on and say, well, we have developed the method and then we'll have applied the method to prioritize areas and go through that whole prioritization process, that's perfectly fine. If you want to increase the metric, add that in there.
Is there future conditions that FEMA, like you get better rating by FEMA if you're building the future conditions? Yeah, I don't know.
Just a question, you're saying you want to identify areas for development?
That are more amicable for a large development to place their manufacturing or what have you. There's areas that of
Basically
ecological.
zoning. Basically zoning.
I don't do that. You're not allowed to cuss.
I didn't say that. Prioritizing, it's not.
We don't have to do the priorities, but the developers could use the data to prioritize.
If we're not telling them this is where you have to develop. However, through this process, it's also, we can't say this is where we have to conserve land.
Okay.
But through the process, we've identified the most attractive lots that need to be conserved, either because they're incredibly important for infiltration or otherwise, you know, that big filter thing that the surface of the earth is. It's saying, hey, this is for land conservation, or, you know, this land is kind of crappy as it is, go ahead and make it crappier. It's got plenty of water.
My pushback on that, I'm just, it's just an opinion.
It's guidance, not prescriptive.
Yeah, mine would be, we're focused on water, and we should be looking at things that are necessary to protect water. All right. I wouldn't try to get into the business of development, and tell them where to develop. I wouldn't even suggest where to develop, because I might suggest developing on Mac's farm, and Mac would be really mad.
And you just knew I had something to add to what you're saying. Now we're cracking it. You're getting into an appointed board of when you do this, an appointed group of people making recommendations on how things need to develop, and you're killing the free enterprise.
And mine is, it's one thing to protect something that's critical to the common good. It's another to try to steer something, because then I think it opens up a, potential conflict. I mean, how do I know that Mac isn't trying to get you to identify his farm as a development site because he really would like to grow houses? But if the
Our
developers,
battery plant, you know.
If it's data, but if it's just data.
I'm just suggesting that to me, it seems like it's a step beyond water to do that. And I
I don't
don't,
know, I was listening to what Catherine and her identification of the needs was directly connected to my just recent statement about the connection of water and the land use plan.
Mhm.
And it's what I'm asking, or what I'm stating, just like land conservation, it's science-based. It's not because Mac is trying to guide it, it's science
No, I
based based on
understand, but-
soil and slope and infiltration, water resources,
But then would it be more beneficial than to create a checklist of considerations to give to developers that would consider what we are saying is most important in the technical part? Because that could be a less aggressive path.
Well, you're hovering all around that when you talk about involving the local zoning, land use plan and all that.
if the planning agency wants to zone, they can fight that battle, they can die on that hill.
Right.
Okay? I'm just suggesting that as an RBC, we should focus on, I don't know, rivers.
Yeah.
You know,
Great shit.
Totally agree with what you're saying.
stay in your lane.
Yes, stay in your line.
So I don't disagree that there's optimal places to put things. I just don't think it is an unelected RBC's duty to identify.
I don't think that was what she's advocating, though. I mean, it's part of the water resource planning is, I mean, development's a big part of that. It's the basic truth. And if we have, not we necessarily we, but there is information out there that identifies development or non-development of these areas has an impact. Why wouldn't we share that information?
If it's, I would agree, if it's negatively affecting the water resource base, we should weigh in. If it
That's
doesn't,
what was less.
I would be agnostic as all get out.
Yes.
Whatever you want to do on lands that do not impact the watershed or have minimal impact on the watershed or the water quality. I don't have to personally like what the plans are, but it's not my way. And it's not critical to the community, for us to restrict or to discourage a certain activity or encourage.
Well, we had already put it as a recommendation and made it into our implementation plan. We have it as a strategy, and we've got specific actions to advance that. That's why I had developed that draft metric to address it. So Jill, to meet your point, rather than just take a little baby step, I kind of changed it and said, you know, a method for prioritizing land conservation is developed and applied. Is that, you comfortable with that? Okay. This is taking longer than I expected, and people are probably going to get angry now. So,
We suffer.
Yeah, let's break for lunch and the rest, the other ones, there's not that many to cover, so. It's 12:26. If you're online and you're still with us, you can stay with us. We'll try to start up again about 12:45. Start back up again.
Nothing got done in here.
Finish off these final progress metrics. You ready? We're rolling.
Area. There's a few discussions on the difference on the- that was a total idiot. Well, he never wants to compliment. It's a complex situation.
Okay,
Just have your way and nothing else.
Jill, are you comfortable then where we left? Metric 3C, we just added, developed and
I
applied.
know Katie's got some ideas over here in regards to,
Industries and people downstream.
well, how would you see more in the lines of guidance documents as to how to choose areas and sightings and stuff and so forth that could go hand in hand, but that.
Did you want to relook at the action? No, okay. Okay,
Who's gonna do it in-house?
okay. We're gonna assign that action to Katie and not stay for,
Exactly.
yeah, all right. Okay. 3D was addressing the strategy about understanding the impact of sedimentation. And the metric is the financial impact of sedimentation on reservoirs and water resources is identified and results are communicated to local governments. So that's basically saying, have you done a study to quantify the impacts of water, of sedimentation? And have you communicated that to folks that control runoff and have ways to minimize stream bank scour and erosion and sediment control, local governments? So is that an appropriate metric, do you think?
Well, I don't know, 3D, the only trouble with that, a lot of it depends on some of the core surveys and things. I don't know what their 10-year schedule is, but it may not be something that's, easily get data on in a couple of years.
That's true, yeah. I think we heard from Amy a month or two ago, after she talked to Stan Simpson, that they were planning on continuing to do full lake bathymetric studies, but I don't remember what frequency or when those were going to occur.
But I don't know, somehow, I know they do it over like a 10-year cycle. I don't know where they are.
Yeah. Yeah.
If ever.
So you're right, that may be a hard one to do because it's kind of at the mercy of the Army Corps getting the data. So we could just consider removing it. It's up to you all. At least as a metric, it can still remain an action, but the action is contingent upon the Army Corps actually collecting the data necessary to do the work. You want to just remove it? I don't want to create metrics necessarily that are really hard to achieve.
Which part of it? The old slavery is at least
At least we. So anyone really want to make a push to keep it?
I'm curious, like, so reservoirs, when I read that, I'm wondering, like, does Broadway Lake, would that qualify?
We were general here, so it's not initially just the Army Corps reservoirs or POE or it could be Broadway Lake, sure.
Because I mean, that one, that would be. They really are seeing pretty heavy impacts from sedimentation on their lake. And I think it would be helpful for Anderson County to understand those impacts better, so it wouldn't rely on the feds. If you just said reservoirs, that's, that could be a lot of different sized water bodies.
Yeah. No, so in that regard, we could keep it, and not say which reservoirs, but.
We just say the impacts instead of just specifically financial.
So we had this discussion in the broad and they said, we really need to make a change. We really need to demonstrate the financial impact to local governments. Otherwise, they're not going to do anything. Say, here's how it's affecting you. Here's how it's affecting our water rates because we're losing storage and we've got to pay to identify additional storage. Here's how it's affecting property values, recreation, the local economy. And they wanted to put a number to it as a means to convince local governments that it's worth taking action on. So Tanya suggested we keep it. We want to keep it as a metric. I don't want to overthink the metrics again, but
I think it's more natural.
well, it's still an action. You still have it as a strategy and an action in your plan. You just won't be measuring it as a metric. So the intent would be to do it if there's opportunity, if there's funding, if there's somebody that really wants to push it. Again, the broad Spartanburg Water said, yeah, we'll do it. And they did it for their reservoirs. And hopefully that serves as an example to the other utilities that rely on reservoirs because they're experiencing similar rates of sedimentation.
Is there any other place that measuring because it looks like this is kind of being put in there to handle a lot of the resulting actions, right? So we show them the financial impacts and they might decide to have riparian buffers,
Yeah.
right? So
yeah.
without this metric kind of moving us forward when we get to the goal that's intended.
Yeah, you're right.
I'd
There's
like
no,
to leave it.
you
I
want to
don't
leave
think
it?
it has
Yeah.
any negative impact either. And then there's only a positive when we act on it.
Okay.
So I'm living in the 319 world, so that's why I'm like focused on it, but I do think leaving the metric in makes it a 319 project, which makes it fundable. We're just taking it out.
All right. That's a good justification. Yeah. I don't know that there's harm in leaving it in. So there's only potential benefit. So we'll keep it. Okay. Objective 4 was protect water resources. The strategies under objective 4, as a reminder, were this one actually has the sedimentation one. RBC supports reducing sediment loading to reservoirs through all these different, mainly local government related actions like green infrastructure and increasing penalties for non-compliance of stormwater and studies to better understand where the sediment's coming from. Those kind of things. So the metric here was the primary sources of sediment loading to reservoirs are identified. So that would mean you've done a study to say, is it coming from construction sites? Is it coming from stream bank scour? Coming from wherever else?
I can identify them.
You can identify it. So do you think we need this as a metric or do you think you already know?
I mean, I think what it's asking is what are the sources probably other than stream bank scour. So you got primary sources there, not primary source. So yeah, I would say as is.
Do you think there is need for additional study to identify primary sources so that we can push local governments, encourage them to do targeted strategies like buffers or increased enforcement or whatever it might be?
Or is that just rearranging the furniture compared to stream scour itself?
Well, even just identifying to them stream scour that incentivizes doing things to help with velocity and.
Okay, so you can address that too. It's not
Quantity,
let it have
infiltration. Yeah. Okay, so are you saying you like the metric? Yeah. Okay. Anybody opposed to metric 4A? Okay. All right.
Sort of implies that you have measured how much for each of those things, in order to say primary.
Yeah. I was gonna, so I mean, that's what John was suggesting. Additional work could be done to figure out where most of the sediment outside of scour is coming
When
from.
we say where, are we talking geographically or are we talking in terms of process?
Yeah, in my mind, I was thinking more of processes and types of land, not specific, not specific.
Well, that goes back to the issue we were just talking about. Right, exactly. About conserving areas or incentivizing development areas. So I think it's both.
Yeah. And both of them would be considered when you're established which is primary. And sooner or later, you have to measure something.
In the Catawba Water Re, they've they've answered that question by doing modeling using this rainfall runoff model, the waterfall model. So they've quantified types of sediment or the amount of sediment coming from different land use types. But through modeling, so it's, just based on previous studies, and we applied it to land use types in the Catawba Basin. And then identified where is most of the sediment coming from as a way to prioritize conservation, land protection, identify areas where buffers would be most amenable, that type of thing. So. Okay, metric 4B was measures are put in place by local governments to prevent sediment loading to reservoirs. I mean, that's kind of a long-term progress metric, take a while, but it's at least there. Any problems with keeping that? Nope. Okay. 5 is drought management, and we've got 4 different recommendations on drought management, updating plans, encouraging drought surcharges, a few other things. So the first metric was 100% of the public water suppliers' drought management plans are updated in the last 5 years and submitted to the State Climate Office for review. So I guess you'd look at this annually and you'd say, okay, has everybody updated them within at least the last 5 years? And if they have, then you meet that metric.
Was it supposed to be a lot or within the next? Like, are we 5 years from now looking backwards?
I think this one you're looking at it annually and you're looking backwards to say, are they all at least 5 years old or less? Everybody good with that? Okay, silence is yes. 5B is state funding is designated to complete phase 2 of the Army Corps Comprehensive Study and Drought Plan Update. Simple metric.
Simple.
Not simple to do, but simple metric. Yeah. Okay with that one? Okay. Then the last objective, promote engagement in the water planning process. And then we have how many strategies? Not very many for 6. Which was maintaining diverse and representative membership in the RBCs. Increased collaboration between all of the South Carolina RBCs, and we've added to that, and adjoining states and the federal government. And then we're doing education and outreach and leveraging existing organizations to help with that. Those are the 3 strategies. So the metric 6A was RBCs continue beyond 2025 with a diverse and representative membership. I mean, you could be more specific and say, with at least 1 member from every interest group category, if you want to be more specific. Or you keep it general. What do you think?
I would be more specific. When my specificity would be that at least 90% of the seats
Be filled.
be filled at any time. That's an objective standard. Also, what people know. You lose one, okay, you lose a second, you got to start replacing.
Yeah.
Need to include that there to be active. I mean, it should be without speaking, but just because we have a list of people on an RDC with representation doesn't mean we're actually moving annually or.
Sentence before the meeting. Before the meeting.
I think that's important. I mean, we've talked before about the Georgia councils, which are governor appointed. They're not, after the first round of planning, the level of participation dropped off somewhat. Hard to keep active
Yeah,
members.
there's the governor, lieutenant governor and speaker appointments. So, but yes.
But I mean, the original council sizes were like this size, right? 20s, and in the last round of plan updates. In Savannah, Bertucci, how many council members did you have participate?
Participating at about 9.
Right, so they dropped more than half.
See that happening, but I would hope that we will still be able to recruit new folks that would,
Yeah, I think that would
be energized. I could see the folks that have been through the rodeo once probably don't want to see the rodeo a second time all the way through. But that's part of what I say, keep the seats full. Let's try to go until you prove that you can. I think it's important, and I think the value. I've always thought the value is to do this was to establish relationships, and I think once you follow a certain density or certain number of folks, you make it quality relationships, you don't have to.
Don't forget, we want to promote the diversity of the group.
And
Sectors represented.
And you want to make sure, one of the discussions that was had, I'll just share with you a side conversation from last night. A member had come to came to me, a member that I would represent, and suggested that having the state try to regulate how we're going to handle new permits in a constrained basin would be problematic. Right? Because back to the max problem, nobody likes to be regulated. Nobody wants to give somebody control, the ability to say, you don't need the water, but you do, or take me, get it, you get it. All right, his suggestion was that, it's a he, was that, rather than the state try to say, we're gonna take it from here and give it to here because that's where it's needed and that's where it's not being used. His was that you get into, localized negotiation or something like that. You allow folks to work collaboratively to present an alternative like, all right, we can make this work by moving some water from this one to this one to this one to this one. And he was just saying the problem is we don't have a vehicle to do that. And my take on that is we kind of do. If you really think about it, if you take an ongoing relationship that we have at the RPCs and you say it may be we want to move water from Rainbow wants more water. All right, how are they going to get it? Right? Or
is there money involved in the negotiation?
However it may be, have a discussion. Is it available? Is it something that can be moved from one agency to another? Through agreement of cooperation rather than it being regulated or being dictated by the state. I don't know if that's a bad thing. But the RBCs on a continuing basis could be the home of where those negotiations would occur, and it would allow those conversations to happen in other than a bilateral way. I mean, if moving water from Anderson to McCormick, was agreeable to both of us, but somehow it impacted someone else negatively. They weren't included. I think we run the risk of having the very thing we were trying to avoid, which is litigation conflict down there. And I think having a group that is already well versed and already has relationships, at least be aware of the discussions. To say, no, it doesn't matter. Moving water from Anderson doesn't matter.
So money change hands in negotiation.
Huh?
Does money change hands in?
Money can't change hands in negotiations because the water
is free.
The water belongs to the state. That's the one thing they're upfront about is that we do not have ownership of the water. We have but we have a right that's not transferable. That's the rub.
Okay. So there it is.
We don't own something we can sell.
There it is.
And that goes back to the old riparian law, common law definition of, okay, we use it, as long as it don't impact the fellow down the river, street,
Yeah, I think there's a role for a group, and I would hope that an ongoing RBC can serve as, at least as a starting point for where those discussions would happen, and where informed members of the basin would be aware of a potential change in where water is being withdrawn or being used. I don't know, just a kind of a tangential discussion from last night, and taking that, what you got?
I mean, unless I'm misunderstanding, you're asking, from what I can understand, you're stating in order to alleviate the issue with some of the over allocation and potential grandfather permit situations, that there would be negotiations within a watershed between whether it be water suppliers, I guess if you saying have to stay in the same sector.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I mean, according to the state, it would.
Right.
And then according to but according to, the regs that are in place, we couldn't move water.
But versus versus making some of the changes that might have to happen to make this possible.
Mhm.
It would be taking out of the equation the governing agency and allowing for local negotiations.
I think, I don't know if taking it out is a more appropriate term, or, if you get ready to go to court, I mean, the first thing the judge always tells you is, thou shalt mediate. Before you come clutter my court, you must mediate. We must have a discussion face to face. The parties must try to reach agreement. And I would view that as step one. Before you take it to the state as something where you're asking either rip water, from the claws of Anderson or from the claws of Greenville to give to Little McCormick because they need water. That we at least be formally charged with, try to have a discussion. See if it's possible to resolve this without it becoming a state dictate.
And
I think that's
just
one
the
thing.
mediation.
Huh?
The mediation clause be effective in this case.
Just an idea. Do you realize this popped on me last night late? And I'm just thinking, how do I keep that? How do I think about that?
Okay, the state would still be the final governing.
They own the water. It's
Right,
state water.
but instead of it being on the House or Senate floor or being convenient, everybody gets to argue about it in politics, let the actual parties involved.
Right.
Try to decide, okay, yeah, we're gonna let you have this many gallons, this many gallons, how does that affect? And try to come up with a plan.
Kind of what we're here for, right?
In theory, that would be, yeah, the ultimate goal is.
Or, the worst example, I'll take an extreme example. One that, that we argue about. It's dry. All right. Could you convince a water system to go to a higher level of conservation to allow more water to remain in the reservoir, in the water, in the basin, to allow for irrigation of critical crops for a short period of time? Is that something that you would want to be able to have that discussion?
I think you would have a better chance having a discussion between business entities instead of lobbyists getting involved like it always happens in Columbia. And then it's about who got the most horsepower. And like I always go back to, not knocking the Association of Counties, they got 11 lobbyists. and those are, other entities have one or two. Yeah, I say, yeah, what you're saying in Utopian, yeah, it's got merit. I'm not,
I'm just right. I'm just putting it out there as step one. It further gives an ongoing RBC as at least a place where the discussion starts.
It would give these organizations or these bodies validity and a reason for continuation.
It would help with staffing of these bodies. It would help with finding volunteers.
Yeah.
Because now there's value.
There you go. There's that almighty dollar against it.
This is
One question is, from an economic perspective for industry, for the regional development councils, are they Are your development authorities going to the municipalities before they're locking in agreements? So then when the municipalities know, hey, we have a data center, or we have something that's coming that's gonna need an extra 1,000,000 gallons of water a day. Or are they making that decision in a vacuum? Because if so, then we would I'm just saying. I just don't know how that process works.
But the process would have to be defined.
I would say, having been in that community, if they're making that decision in a vacuum, they're gonna lose.
So they would have already talked to,
Absolutely.
okay, well, there you go.
Wait, we have a fairly substantial buy-in, like six something a gallon. If
Okay,
you're coming in wanting 10 million gallons of water, it's gonna cost you $70 million to buy into our system.
so they would
That
have,
turns away a lot of new data centers.
yeah.
Especially Greenville.
Well, I mean, that sounds like that's the answer. I just was wondering if that meant that you'd have this vacuum out here that was operating separately, but it sounds like no.
But then what's funny is they come back and say, nah, we only need 1 million.
That's usually what happens.
Yeah, the data centers, they say they want so much water.
Here's
They
the
say,
dynamic.
yeah, we can do it with 1 million now.
The last couple of years, we get asked to talk about electricity now. What is your renewable or your green makeup of your electrical capacity? They're allowed to ask us that. I have no problem with asking them, how are you gonna conserve water?
Yeah.
I mean, and looking in the companies that are professing to want to know what your, your renewable makeup of your electricity is, guess what? They're gonna want to conserve water too. Because it all hits their sustainability goal. The conversation is turning.
Yeah, we're even,
I love it. I love
we're
the
even looking
idea.
at policy, we're even at policy in place now to look at. Like, you'll get somebody come into a warehouse, they're building a warehouse. They say, we need 200,000 gallons a day. And, but we have the ability to. Every year go and reevaluate what their usage is. And we can go back to them and say, no, you're using $400,000 a day, you owe us $200,000 in capacity. But we've been starting to make that, because people have done it. I mean, they go in there and say, oh, we only need 200,000, we'll put in this warehouse. All we're gonna do is stock stuff, and all of a sudden they convert it over to make clothes or something like that, you know? What's that?
Bottled water.
We can do that. I'll let them bottle the water.
I mean, that sounds like you would have saved a lot of money, like with the 5R, for example. Those discussions took years and years and years. If you do have a platform where people can at least begin some of those discussions, maybe it will make things work better.
Back to my metric.
Y'all got a short drive. I gotta go to Chapel Hill. Let's get done.
No, I'm not. I'm doing Lower Savannah, not tomorrow, so I'm not going anywhere.
Salary.
I can sit here all day if you guys want. So Scott, I think you had another suggestion to expand this. I can't remember now what it was. You said diverse, active, representative, but what did you say?
Mine was to set a standard on how many seats. have to be.
Okay,
And I threw out 90%. There's 25 on the panel. All right. You're allowed to have two could be vacant at any given time. But no more. And you're not, our goal would be obviously 100, but minimum 90%.
And we just figured out we're coming up on some of us coming out in
Yeah,
less than 6 months.
we've got a third of us roll off in
July,
at the end of the year.
no, July.
It's the word I'm looking for, 90%.
July.
Yeah, well,
Yeah.
I'm assuming you're gonna continue again. Are you two?
I'm a 2 year.
There you go.
All right, so you need
I think there's just one word.
If you don't, you'll appoint Elizabeth, so
Yeah,
somebody's
somebody's
not going away.
somebody.
So, but I'm just saying, the people that want to be reappointed should, obviously get a chance to do that, but if we have people that don't want to be reappointed and they don't have a replacement in mind, we should go find 90%. Just a standard.
Okay, the second one was speaking to that education and leveraging existing groups, and it just simply said coordination occurs with groups that have existing education outreach. efforts or resources, whatever, that focus on water conservation. It was just acknowledging that, yep, we've reached out and worked with Clemson's extension to push our whatever strategy or action or message. Is that too general? Is it good enough?
Oh.
What was that?
So,
Last one, so.
I'm good with 6B. Can I ask about a 6C? Here for 6C. The only reason I asked is we had a big conversation earlier in regards to engagement between perhaps the Saluda Broad and Savannah, engagement annually with all of the RBCs, engagement with Georgia. So I'd like to see a metric that captures, has any of that.
How do you want to measure it?
I would want to see the meetings happened, I guess.
Or at least not, at least one meeting with each.
I mean, because in regards to Georgia, apparently what I heard was not necessarily that we're going to create a collaborative, but yet we were going to attend theirs and they're going to attend ours. So that is attendance. With the RBCs, that's the meeting has to be scheduled and we have to attend at least annually. And same with if it's a regional collaborative.
Something like that. Okay. Everyone good with that?
It's my favorite thing that's come out of this entire project. Just like.
All right, so those are progress metrics. We'll document those at the end of chapter 10, which is focused mostly on the implementation plan, but it will be the last part of, or second to last part of chapter 10. The last part of chapter 10 is documenting your vote on the draft river basin plan, which we'll probably do in maybe 2 months from now. Okay, so we've got our implementation plan table. We'll write chapter 10, which provides the narrative around that. It talks also about funding sources. When we send chapter 10 out for y'all to review, make sure you're comfortable with everything we have in the implementation plan. If you have additional funding sources that aren't listed in our 2 or 3 different tables, let us know. And I'm thinking of you because you seem to know a lot of good funding sources. There's also a section on long-term actions. And again, I haven't really showed this as part of the table, but we've got long-term goals and objectives. Read those and make sure you're comfortable with them. We haven't really spent a lot of time discussing those in other RBCs, and we haven't here either. They just kind of build on your short-term ones. But there is a separate subsection, chapter 10, that focuses on long-term goals and objectives. So those are things to look for when we send out a draft to chapter 10, probably in 2 weeks. We'll get that to you before the next meeting. The other thing I wanted to do today was just briefly talk about a few of the comments that we've already received on the draft chapters, which I circulated several days ago. You have until next Friday to review. One of them, and I'm glad Mark noticed, is a recommendation we included in here that we didn't officially vote on, but we talked about it and we said, oh, we should probably revisit this. And my way to revisit it was to actually put it as a recommendation. And then see how you guys react to it. And I misspelled discourages, but 2 people that reviewed it already saw that, so thank you. That green little box is moving around there. There we go. So it's this recommendation here. RBC discourages the use of decreasing block rate structures by water providers. I think this was something Scott brought up. We decided to have a recommendation on drought surcharges. So when you use an excessive amount of water, then that would kick in. And we've given the example of Greenville water here. I hope you're okay with that, Jeff. This one, which again, we didn't vote on, it's just a general, we discourage the use of decreasing block rate structures or declining block rate structures. And as I was writing this, I ran across something that I didn't realize. In North Carolina, they don't even allow it if you're going to be getting any state funding. And it's been that way for 14 years. In North Carolina, if you want to get funding through the state for any water or sewer project or water project, you cannot have a decreasing block rate structure. So to be eligible, you have to have, well, you can't have you don't have to have increasing, but you can't have decreasing. Yeah. So any concerns about that as a recommendation? Do you want to include that as a recommendation or?
Well, the only concern I have with that is, I don't want it to discourage water systems from negotiating with wholesalers. Some of our wholesalers have a lower rate than what our actual customers have. Based on.
Does it, if the wholesaler takes more and more water, does the
Not more and more, they have a set rate.
No, you can have separate rates.
Okay.
I'm saying
Okay.
if you're selling water to me at one
Yeah, so
price,
maybe-
you sell it,
we have one
to my
rate for-
neighbors
we have
at
one
a
rate
slightly
for-
different price. That's fine. That's a negotiated event.
Okay.
The issue would be if you got the deal you have with me says for the first 1,000,000 gallons, you pay $5 a K gallon. And then for every
Yeah, we'll
gallon
charge you.
after that, you pay $2.
We charge you. We charge you. If you go over, if
Because
you're one
that's
of
what
our
costs.
wholesalers. And you go over negotiated rate, you pay the higher rate, you pay a higher rate than what you would if on a negotiated rate. Pay the second rate.
It's okay for them to be different than your neighbor. It's when it gets cheaper, the more you use.
No, we don't have that, so that's fine, I'm fine with it.
Yeah, I'm big on letting economics drive as many decisions. People won't be crazy doing research.
So recognizing that elected officials don't necessarily have to know what it is that they're being asked to do. This might be helpful for local utilities that to be able to point and say, look, the state doesn't like the way that we're doing. I think that would be helpful for them.
I heard the most important thing coming from John right there, which is the avenue to do this is probably to see if we can get our state revolving loan funds and the Department of Ag that issues the loans to support our programs to do exactly what Carolina can. And then it self-solves. Everybody's going to be in compliance because everybody wants to get a loan, discount rates. I mean, that's a pretty elegant solution, to be honest. You didn't have to make it a law. We said, you want to do it, that's fine. You just don't get any money.
So can we say that RBC encourages the state to adopt North Carolina's stance?
Similar requirement, if you want to, yeah.
Describe the stance, but don't put the word North Carolina.
Don't put North Carolina, add Georgia into it
Don't put
too.
Georgia in there. Unless you say, don't be like.
Don't be like Georgia.
Then then we're good with that, but be like them, don't put that. in.
Yeah, maybe, RBC encourages South Carolina to adopt, whatever, however you worded it.
Policy that would encourage.
Yeah,
increasing block
yeah.
rates. Or
Funding,
decreasing.
funding availability is contingent on the lack of block rate or something like that.
Now, you didn't point it out, but it probably was going through your mind. Do you want this to be specific just for residential customers or should it be for all customers? Do you have much of a concern about having a decreasing block structure for industrial customers?
No, I'm okay with it being whatever the industrial user has. Whatever their rate agreement is, they can negotiate that.
They're gonna get a flat one.
Yeah.
There's not.
I'm okay.
or maybe an increase in the flat, and it was flat curve.
But it's not gonna be, you're saying that utilities don't typically have decreasing rate structures with industries? I thought that was somewhat kind of common. You're just flat rate, okay. I didn't, okay. Give up that money. We're not giving up that money. Okay, do you want me to take out the North Carolina example here, if we're gonna add that bottom part in?
Some of that was tongue in cheek and some of it's real.
Yeah, that's what I'm trying to understand, which is real.
We want to emulate.
I can go to Virginia and see what they're doing. If we're another state other than the border.
If it isn't necessary, take it out.
Yeah.
Something not a border state.
Huh?
But
It's not a border state.
Well, then you gotta be careful how far non-border.
Yeah,
You
don't
want to
go-
really kill it like California.
There you go.
they don't go that far.
Sorry.
Alabama may be okay, Kentucky may be okay.
How about I just say some states use?
Yeah, that's good.
Okay, all right. I'll put it in some states. Or I could put in John's state, they use. Okay, so that was one I wanted to point out in the draft, or in the draft chapter 8. The other recommendations in here, we've talked about at length. And I do want you all to read the narrative behind these recommendations and make sure you're comfortable with it. Harry, you pointed out something that's always confused me, but I guess our narrative description of the drought triggers needs a little bit of tweaking. And you sent me what the language should say. Is that just the narrative, or does it include this table?
Yeah, I went back and did a little bit of research, and the Corps kind of gradually changed what was in the 2012 plan. But when you're in level 2, when Broad River thing is less than the 10%, they go to a daily average, not a weekly average. And that's what's active. If you go online to the water management page, that's the table that's actually online at that website.
Oh, okay, so we can grab that table.
Yes.
Okay, all right, I'll mention that.
But we went back to the original 2012 plan, and they used to be in both level 1 and level 2. But somehow it got changed over the years.
Okay. What we didn't do is I didn't put in the alternative 2 version of this, where they're just not seasonally changing, they're just flat. I don't know if you think it's.
Yeah, they got rid of the tails, which made no sense when you're in a drought. Why do you need to lower the level? You're already in a drought.
Yeah, but
We argued with that for years, but that was one of the things in the phase 2 plan that didn't get implemented.
right,
That and the big gap between the level 2
it
and
was
3.
pretty. Oh,
Those are key things as far a lot of us felt.
okay. Okay, that was really what I wanted to talk about on chapter 8. We just point something out on chapter 7. Chapter 7 is short. It just introduces the water management strategies that you all discussed and then kind of prioritized. And then this bulleted part here captures some of your discussion of some other considerations. Some of them are related to these strategies. Some of them are different altogether. Just presented it in this way. Please read over that and make sure you've captured the discussion appropriately. We've got the discussion on industrial and ag demand side strategies. Mark, you had made a comment about checking with the manufacturing association, I think, about what strategies they.
Yeah, because I think the strategies that I read, that, had to do with toilets and, those type things. And I'm thinking more like using gray water for non-contact processed water when available. Some strategies like that. I have reached out to the Manufacturing Alliance. They're having trouble getting through their firewalls to talk to somebody that's an expert.
Okay.
So, but I've got another, I'm gonna talk to somebody in sustainability.
Okay.
Have some thoughts.
Well, good. That was my next question is, do you have a contact? But we've already tried to make
And
that
I got
connection.
my hand slapped once.
All right. I'll let you keep pursuing that rather than get my hand slapped too.
Happened to.
Okay, we did add a section here on adaptive management. And, we had a short discussion in one of our council meetings about uncertainty and how, even though it looks like we've got plenty of water now, if any of these conditions change or multiple conditions change, like the climate or population grows different than what we might expect, or, suddenly there's a big water quality issue that's impacting quantity availability, future land use, floods, Georgia water use, we talked about that today. We've just tried to acknowledge those uncertainties in this section and explain that this is why we need to continue to do planning and update planning because things change. So it's just more of a discussion, but read it, make sure you're comfortable with it, or if you have any suggestions on improving it or adding to it, let us know. Then the last other chapter is chapter 9. This is organized in 3 different parts. The first part is all the planning process recommendations. The recommendations are in bold. The discussion behind the recommendations, trying to capture your thoughts and ideas, or explain the recommendation is not bold. Again, read through that, make sure you're comfortable that we've captured that discussion or we're adequately describing the recommendations. If you think we need to add to it, to explain it, offer some suggested language. Technical recommendations, same thing. Got a discussion on each one of those, and then the policy, regulatory, and legislative ones. And these are the ones I think really want you to focus on because that's a lot of what Water SC is going to be looking into, or actually is, even in next month or next week's meeting. So that's it. Our plan for next month is, that's the broad plan for next month is, by next month, we'll have chapter 10 done and we'll try to have the whole draft plan together. You kind of look at everything together, and that will include sections where you've already addressed your comments. We'll circulate that comment log, so you can see specifically which comments we addressed and how, and what other RBC members' comments were. We'll spend some time going through the log perhaps, but there's not really been a whole lot of comments received, so I don't know that we need to spend much time doing that. I don't think we're going to be ready to vote on the plan in February because we're probably not going to get you the whole plan executive summary in enough time that you'll have read it. So we'll probably do that in March. And then we'll schedule a public meeting sometime late March or maybe early April. But we've accomplished everything that we need to accomplish other than just getting the draft plan together. We may not need to meet in person in February or even March. If all we're doing is just reviewing comments that were submitted. But do y'all have a preference? Certainly happy to meet in person. It's more productive that way. But if you would rather just meet virtually, or if you want to wait and decide, we'll see how many comments come in. I mean, the other thing you'll be looking at too is the executive summary. And if you haven't had time to look at and review the chapters, I'd hope you at least review that more closely because that's what most people will be reading, especially decision makers. And it's probably 30 pages, very pictorial, a lot of photos, graphics, maps. So it shouldn't take a lot of time to review, but we're going to try to get you a draft of that by February. But any thoughts on, do you want to meet in person or virtually, or you want to just wait and decide a week or two before the meeting?
Jeff won't be here.
Be here.
Water utility utility management conference in Dallas is that week.
Okay. What do you think, Jill?
I don't know, I might be alone in this, but I enjoyed doing this in a group setting. I think we've got probably still some comments that are gonna come in.
Yeah,
And
I hope so.
to have a dialogue in the room. March might not have to happen, because if we iron out all of it, then you're just reviewing something that's
right,
been negotiated to its completion.
Yeah.
But I'd like to keep February on the calendar and then discuss March at that meeting.
Okay,
So that.
So move.
That's good. Good.
Sounds good.
All right, we'll plan on meeting here for February the 12th. And then potentially we could do a virtual meeting if we're just primarily voting on the draft plan and organizing ourselves for that first public meeting.
I think that we can work at this.
Yeah,
Part of what we.
it is, but see, SCEC ends Tuesday. Oh, it ends Wednesday. You want to consider moving it? If it's especially if it's just virtual.
Just brought it up.
Okay, maybe we could talk about that at a
I'll leave
planning
that to
team call.
discussion here. I attend SEC, and I've already got plans to come back Tuesday night for this and other reasons. I know there's plenty of people in the room that SEC means nothing to them, so.
Right.
For those, it's our annual environmental conference in Berlin, where most of the water utilities and engineers. Everybody are at.
Yeah. Well, we probably will be voting on the draft plan, so we want good attendance. We don't want the whole water utility sector not to be here. Where are you gonna be?
Where I have to be.
What about you?
Possible all over there.
Possible you'll be there. You'll be here or there?
In March.
March.
I'll be at that conference.
A conference. Okay.
I'm still.
I mean, it's a thing, like, what about y'all proxy? You speak of y'all proxy, Mark and I was like, here. I'll be here.
Depending on if we know, if it's short, we know what time we're voting, most of us could probably call in. By then we would have reviewed it, so it's not like we were able to participate.
I would think, that we should know what comments that come out of the draft, whether we're going to be close enough to consensus for it to be a called meeting or a not called meeting. If we already have consensus after we receive the draft and there's not many comments, calls make sense because then it's like, it's easy to say yes and be done. If there's a lot of comments, you might still have.
Yeah. All right, let's play it by ear then. We'll decide after our February meeting what we're gonna do for March.
One last question, it's about adaptive management that you've introduced to me. It seems to me that is a very important concept for this group and ongoing activities that come after this group.
Yeah.
And I'm trying to figure out some way of maybe elevating that to something that is a commitment of some kind or the other. And that has a lot of different meanings and definitions in adaptive management for this purpose, that purpose. But I'm wondering if it doesn't need to be strong for this kind of group to exist and do what it needs to do in the future to respond to things that will change. So that's just a general comment on how to do it exactly.
I mean, you might think of proposing an action or a strategy that says we will continue to revisit this as part of future planning and look at all these different uncertainty drivers, see which ones have changed and decide, do we need to?
A little bit more specificity in it about what triggers or what drives the situation, perhaps. And I haven't come to, I read through it and I said, I wonder. And that was the thing that came out of it. And so I'll leave it there for, I'll maybe bring it back up later.
Yeah. So that's a very good point. We kept it very general. And other water resource plans that we've done for like regional water groups or more local level, we've identified specific triggers. And said if this happens, then you're going to need to build this reservoir or make this interconnection or something. But we've
or at least just to reconvene a meeting that says, hey, we need to look at this. What trigger would you use for that? I don't know. Then I came up pretty dry and
I was gonna ask this almost a similar thing. It looks like you stopped planning on May 2025. I would suggest that if the goal was to keep an informed committee, and one together, and to actually move through implementation, that you go ahead and realize that you may want to be probably quarterly after that.
Yes,
Go ahead and at least acknowledge that. Otherwise, there's gonna be a lot of it's gonna clear the schedule.
Then at that point in time, though, understanding your obligations, not for you specifically, but CDM Smith's obligations. When this plan is finalized, and we speak of moving the RBCs forward into quarterly meetings, is that organization rely on the RBCs themselves to take ownership of this? And we create our agendas and schedules, or are you still in a facilitating role? And for how long?
It's so like for the broad, we had a little bit of budget left, so we did an extra or two implementation meetings. But then our contract's done. So I think it's kind of up to, I don't know if Scott wants to speak, it's up to DES whether they want to kind of help when the RBCs keep moving, or there's funding for them to do that, or if you want to hire a facilitator, or if y'all want to do it yourselves. I think none of that's really been etched in stone yet, so kind of needs to be figured out.
Okay.
I think, if they don't have the funding, we have John.
Here,
I mean, you tell the staff things, right?
Just to pick up on a couple of points, I mean, after having been involved in public meetings in this for 23 to 4 years, I think one of the problems we're gonna have to think about when we have a public meeting is, I mean, we don't have any major shortfalls, but whenever you start talking to the public, they're gonna jump right into drought issue, no problem. And also picking up on the adaptive management. I think we have to kind of think a little bit about how you want to present that to the public. Otherwise, they're gonna kind of glaze over.
Yeah.
Because
Yep.
because they tend to jump on issues right away. Well, we're talking about trying to avoid the issue. Because right now, go downstream, there's a lot of issues. We don't have quite as many. So I think we need to kind of just focus on that when it gets closer to that public meeting.
Okay. And I'm glad you brought that up, because we will need time to talk about the public meeting. Ideally, what's happened in the Edisto and the Broad is that you all will, 3 or 4 or 5 of you will agree to speak at the public meeting. You know, we'll break out the individual section. It worked well with the Broad. Is that what the PD is planning on doing too, Tom? Yep. So I need to find folks that are willing to speak, and hopefully that includes the chair and or vice chair, and then others. Especially if it's a topic that's kind of important to your interest category. So we'll need to spend a little bit of time during March to figure out who's talking on what. I'll put together a draft of a presentation, and then y'all can tweak it as you see fit. But at least that's what I've done in the other RBCs, provided the slides, and you can figure out the message and whether you want different slides or whatever. But think about if you're willing to participate in a public meeting and provide 5-7 minutes of your time talking.
Public meeting, where will it be? I mean, would it be like here? I mean,
Probably wouldn't be in this room. It would be somewhere a little bigger venue, even though the public meetings haven't been super well attended for the Broad or the Edisto, but we'll have to find a spot. I don't know if anybody has any suggestions.
We had one of the initial public meetings at the technical college. Many colleagues attended.
And is that, didn't we have one meeting there? I wasn't at it, but we had a RBC after the field trip thing.
That was done. That was what I think interviews.
That's facility development.
Okay.
Yeah, that, well, the Anderson County facility
Oh, that was.
is huge.
Yeah.
That's what we went after.
Okay, anything else? Jill, do you have anything?
It was catching at the end of this. I never prepare for anything, but to thank you all for your efforts. I think about these times, like, oh, I've got something to say at the end. But I do. I thank y'all for your efforts and for, you know, sticking with it all the way through. And for the willingness to express your feelings and represent your sector. And this last push obviously is really important. I'm guilty of not having enough time available for, this is easy for me, but taking time aside to, read the chapters in the way they need to be read, it's tough, so I recognize that, so I thank you, especially the 2 or 3 or 4 that have really responded to John's request for feedback on the chapters, and I encourage you all to read it and provide that feedback for the February 12th meeting, and I look forward to that discussion.
Thank you, everyone.
It's. Trying to keep up with trouble. Or 3 to 4.